Chapter 1763. Elliot stared at Sally in disbelief. Before they left, Helena had reminded him not to make any promises easily if the peace treaty was brought up. It would depend on the Roth Empire's performance. Now, the Roth Empire and the forest trolls had yet to express their stance, but Sally actually expressed the elves' stance without discussing it with him. Sally was the elven race's new princess. After Irina led the night elves out of the Wind Forest, she became the best candidate for the next elven queen. Helena had asked her to lead the team to attend such an important meeting so that she could broaden her horizons and announce the new elven princess to the outside world. Hence, she was naturally recognized as the elven representative spokesperson, and also represented the wishes of the Wind Forest. The representatives of the other races were not too surprised by the elves' choice. For the past 100 years, the elves had been well prepared, and their power had been rising steadily. They did indeed have the foundation of a strong race. However, all of this disappeared completely after the Elven Queen went into seclusion and Irina reappeared. She killed 3 10th-tier elven powerhouses consecutively and led 30,000 elven slaves and some elven soldiers out of the Wind Forest. The elves now had to consider how to settle the increasingly unstable the Wind Forest and the Night Elves who had taken root in Chaos City and were gradually expanding their influence, instead of trying to get a share of the pie in the racial war. Josh also looked at Sally with surprise when he heard that. This was not something that should have happened in the plan. The Wind Forest should be on the same side as the Roth Empire. The forest trolls could not hide their surprise as well. War is cruel, but that does not mean that maintaining the status quo is right. Josh stood up and calmly said, "The Roth Empire has over 100 million citizens, which is more than the total population of the other 6 races. However, our territory is ranked 3rd from the bottom among the 8 major races. Furthermore, almost half of the land in the north is extremely cold and uninhabitable. Back then, the human race was weak and paid a terrible price to stand at the end of the racial war. When we signed the peace treaty to divide the land, we had no right to speak. Now that the 100-year agreement is up, our Roth Empire needs more land to settle our people. Therefore, we cannot accept the renewal of the peace agreement according to the original agreement." Josh had a scholarly appearance, but his words were powerful and resonant, displaying the aura that a prince of a powerful empire should possess. Big brother Joshua and father want to start a war? But from what he said, it seems quite reasonable. But if we start a war, many innocent soldiers will lose their lives, right? Vanessa, who was about to fall asleep, became more and more awake as she listened to everyone's arguments. However, after hearing Josh's words, she fell into deep worry again. She didn't want the Roth Empire to fall into war at all. The various representatives all had different expressions on their faces. After Franklin's harsh words, only the Roth Empire still dared to go against him. Furthermore, the invitation was very clear: they wanted to redivide the territories. "Andre, if we were to restart the racial war, how much territory do you think you'll be able to occupy?" Franklin asked Joshua. "If the giant dragons don't participate in the war, the Roth Empire will be unmatched," Josh said as he looked into Franklin's eyes. "What if the colossal dragon race joins the war? The Roth Empire and the colossal dragon race can split the world equally," Josh continued. There was an uproar in the restaurant instantly. This chap was looking down on the various races too much. The Roth Empire was getting stronger day by day, and this was something that all the races could see. Alex, who appeared out of nowhere, had completely overturned the stereotype of humans as weak and weak. Even so, no one felt that the Roth Empire was strong enough to go against the colossal dragon race. But today, the Roth Empire's second prince, Josh, actually boasted that the Roth Empire could defeat all the races and go against the colossal dragon race as equals. Arrogant brat. Oster was furious. He suddenly stood up and stared at Josh with his bull-like eyes as he mocked, "Your Roth Empire can't even cross the borders of the orcs. You've never really won a war at the borders, and you dare to say that you can conquer the entire continent? Perhaps you orcs call it a war, but to the Roth Empire's cavalry, it's just a training ground used to train our soldiers. The 10 military divisions rotate once a year." Josh looked at Oster with pity. "It's not that we can't cross it, but we look down on that barren piece of land." Oster's body swayed, and he staggered back to his seat as if he had suffered a huge blow. So every year, the Roth Empire's army would be weaker for a period of time. It's not because they're not used to the season, but because they're rotating new recruits? The orc at the side swallowed his saliva and felt a little lost. When the various races' representatives heard that, their expressions also became very serious. The border wars between the Roth Empire and the orcs had been going back and forth for many years, and both sides had won and lost. Therefore, the various races' assessment of the Roth Empire's combat power was that it was slightly stronger than the orcs, but it was far from being able to crush them. Thus, the various races did not pay enough attention and be on guard. No one would have thought that the Roth Empire's power would actually surpass the various races after secretly developing for 100 years. It was even close to the colossal dragon race. It really caught everyone off guard. The Forest Trolls representative stood up and said, "We, the Forest Trolls, also think that the previous division of the territory was unfair and cannot renew the peace agreement. We request to redivide the territory according to each race's power." The Forest Trolls were also very powerful. Although their population was not huge, they would have the power of the 5th tier when they reached adulthood. Their mid-tier and high-tier combat power was very shocking. The Roth Empire and the Forest Trolls. Even the giant dragons had to think carefully about how to deal with them. The situation that was originally good was also reversed at this moment. "We, the elves." Elliot stood up anxiously. "Elliot, mind your status," Sally said coldly. Elliot choked on his words. He turned to Sally, and anxiously said, "Sally, this is not something you can decide. High Priestess Helena, I don't care what the High Priestess said to you. I am the Princess of the Elves, and also the leader of this representative team. My words represent the elves' attitude, and I have to be responsible for all my people," Sally said coldly. But Elliot still wanted to say something. "I order you to sit down and remain silent," Sally ordered expressionlessly as she flashed her identity token. "Why you want to get us killed?" Elliot heaved a long sigh and sat back down heavily in his seat. "Good lad, you have some guts." Franklin looked at Josh again, and then closed his eyes in annoyance. He did not expect that the giant dragons would be threatened by humans one day. One had to know that the dragons had given them some protection in the past, and that was why they were not wiped out by the demons and orcs. "It's not guts, it's confidence," Josh said calmly. He raised his eyebrows proudly. "There will be no suspense about the outcome of the war. We will get what we want. The confidence that the Empire soldiers exchanged with their blood and lives is not for the royal family to exchange for war." Right at this moment, the restaurant's door suddenly opened, and a figure carrying a heavy sword on his back walked in. Chapter 1764. Everyone turned to look at the entrance of the restaurant. "Alex!" Weston stood up from his chair in shock. The various representatives couldn't hide their shock either. Although Alex had returned from the battle in Rodu a few months ago, he hadn't shown himself in front of anyone. His whereabouts were mysterious and hard to track. They were still wondering why Alex wasn't here today, and didn't expect him to appear at this moment. Josh's body was a little stiff as he turned to look at Alex, who was walking in. His expression was a little unnatural, and his gaze was a little evasive. Richard also stood up cautiously, and held his magic caster's staff as he stood beside Josh to protect him. In close combat, Alex was undoubtedly the scariest opponent. No one could block his sword within 2 meters, let alone a magic caster. "You haven't changed at all after so many years," Dracula said to Alex in amazement. "Uncle, can you beat him now?" Camilla asked curiously. "No," Dracula said honestly. "But you're the ancestor now?" Benson was still chopped in half. Dracula shrugged, and helplessly said, "Some people are born unreasonable. You're really a coward." Camilla nodded, and glanced at Irina. She was the same. "Is this big sister Irina's man? He's so handsome." Connie couldn't help but look at him with stars in her eyes. She had heard about Alex's legend since she was young. Even though the orcs didn't have a good relationship with the Roth Empire, it didn't affect their respect for Alex at all. Her father had said before that he was a human and opponent worthy of respect. However, her gaze was quickly attracted by the figure in Alex's hand. "That's brother?" Connie bit her lip. Irina had already mentioned this to her yesterday. Ferdinand wasn't dead, but he would appear at today's meeting as an important witness to the existence of the devil. However, seeing him again after so many months, Connie still couldn't bear to look at the skinny Ferdinand. "Ferdinand? Isn't he dead?" Oster was shocked as well. That was because Irina had used the holy light to evolve Ferdinand, who had turned into a demon, causing his plan to fail. He had thought that Ferdinand was dead, but he did not expect to see him here again. "Alex, long time no see." Josh's voice was a little hoarse as he looked at Alex. He tried his best to squeeze out a smile, but he was unable to do so. Even though 3 years had passed and the man he had once smashed down from the sky appeared in front of him again, he still felt an incomparably huge pressure. Meg casually tossed Ferdinand to the ground, and calmly said to Joshua, "You were too arrogant for not killing me back then. Perhaps this is a misunderstanding." Josh could sense the killing intent, and he reflexively took half a step back. His throat was so dry that he could barely make a sound. "Heh, misunderstanding?" Mag chuckled. Did this second prince really have a sense of humor? Yes. We can resolve this misunderstanding anytime. You are the Empire's general, and the Empire needs you now. Josh quickly adjusted his attitude, and stood up straight again. He looked at Meg warily, and said, Father said that as long as you are willing to return, you will be the Roth Empire's marshal. You will be second only to one and above everyone else. Meg looked at Josh, who had calmed down. This second prince was indeed a scheming person. His mental fortitude was much stronger than Sean's. He could even use the word misunderstanding to brush off such a life-or-death feud, and talk about recruitment in the blink of an eye. The various representatives had their own agendas. The representatives who had participated in the ambush on the rainy night back then were all averting their gazes, afraid of going up against Alex. It would not end well for them to provoke this god of death. Don't worry. I won't kill you today. Meg looked at Josh mockingly before turning to Michael. City Lord Michael, I have brought him to you. Josh heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Only then did he realize that his back and palms were already drenched in sweat. When he realized the fear he had for Alex from the bottom of his heart, anger rose in his heart again. If not for the fact that he couldn't defeat him, why would he, the second prince of the Roth Empire, be in such a state? This fellow? However, before Josh could think further, his gaze was already attracted by Ferdinand, who was lying on the ground. A demonic red light flashed past his eyes. It's a familiar aura. Could he also be? Irina narrowed her eyes and looked at Josh. In that instant, she seemed to have sensed a trace of demonic aura. However, Ferdinand was lying beside Josh, so perhaps the demonic aura on him had yet to dissipate. This is? The various representatives looked at the skinny youth lying on the ground doubtfully. Who was this person that Alex was escorting personally? Thank you for your trouble. Michael nodded. He stood up, and loudly said, Dear representatives, I have invited all of you here today not only to discuss the continuation of the peace agreement, but also to inform all of you of a critical matter that concerns the survival of all of our races. The Roth Empire and the Forest Trolls might have their own ideas, but what the various races of the Norland continent need to urgently face now is not the redistribution of territories, but a group of terrifying existences. Josh's eyes darted around rapidly. He retracted his gaze from Ferdinand, but his heart was filled with panic. He was sure that this person on the ground had gotten that thing like him. But why did he become like this? And why did he appear in such an occasion? Terrifying existences? What is that? The dwarf representative asked loudly. Everyone was also looking at Michael in confusion. The representatives sent by all the powerful races of the Norland continent were all here. The 3 big shots of the giant dragons were also sitting here. What else could be considered a terrifying existence to them? It's the devil. A group of devils that have survived from ancient times until now. Or you can call them the Great Old Ones. They have powerful abilities, unkillable vitality, and the terrifying ability to bewitch people, Michael said. Devils? The various representatives were confused and in disbelief. The devils bewitch living beings to offer them their souls, and then control them to kill each other, turning the world into a purgatory. Michael looked at everyone, and calmly said, I know that all of you might not be able to accept this in a short period of time, so I asked Alex to bring this young man who offered his soul to the devil today. He is Ferdinand, the son of Isaiah of the Falk tribe. Just over a month ago at the conferring ceremony, Irina used the holy light to expose him on the spot. He exchanged his soul with the devil, and was purified by the holy light. Chief Oster and Chief Connie were also present at that time, and can be witnesses. All the representatives looked at Connie and Oster after hearing that. This explosive news was already a little beyond what they could accept. He was once my closest brother, but he was bewitched by the devil to kill all my relatives, including himself. Connie took out the diary left behind by her grandmother with a sorrowful expression. My grandmother had already guessed this, but she was murdered. The devil killed them. Although Oster was unhappy that Irina ruined his plan that day, Ferdinand's strange behavior did make him shudder when he recalled it. He hesitated for a while, and nodded. I was indeed present that day. Ferdinand's behavior was not like a normal orc, and he did have a terrifying aura. Not only was he powerful, but he was also as gloomy as a bottomless abyss. The Devil King will come eventually. All of you have to die? All of you have to die. Ferdinand, who was lying on the ground, suddenly twisted and tried to stand up. The abyss roared with a hoarse voice. His blood-red eyes were glowing with a deathly glow, and he was kicked back to the ground by Meg. Ferdinand's strange behavior, as well as Connie and Oster's testimonies, made all the representatives present feel as if they had fallen into an ice cave. A terrifying existence was suddenly thrown in front of them. Perhaps, he was just triggered by something. We have to bury a few lunatics like him every year, the goblin's representative probed. Everyone's eyes lit up. They couldn't rule out that possibility. I know everyone might not believe it, so I invited the hairless monk back to tell everyone what exactly happened to the Urba tribe's tragedy 100 years ago. Michael looked at Rex. The Urba tribe's tragedy shocked everyone back then. Many people present knew about it, and some even went to the scene to check it out. They still felt nauseous when they recalled it now. This tragedy back then was eventually attributed to the hairless monk's revenge massacre. However, there were many suspicious points, so Rex was locked up in the Batai prison. They heard that he left the Batai prison some time ago, and became the master of the new chief of the Fok tribe. That night, I went to the Urba tribe to take revenge for how they bullied my mother and me back then. However, I only wanted to teach a lesson to a few people who left a deep impression on me. But when I reached the tribe, Rex described what he saw that night in a low voice. The strange sacrificial ceremony, the frenzied orcs of the Urba tribe, biting and killing each other. Those terrifying scenes appeared in everyone's minds through Rex's description. Everyone's faces turned pale, and they trembled in fear. Some of the representatives who had been to the Urba tribe's tragedy scene couldn't help but cover their mouths and retch. They finally understood how those strange corpses and wounds came about. It wasn't a one-sided massacre, but a chaotic and frenzied biting each other. Any race with intelligence wouldn't be able to do such a terrifying thing. The devil bewitched them, and then made them kill themselves. Rex ended his description calmly. A drop of cold sweat slid down his cheek. It could be seen that he wasn't calm on the inside from the way his veins were popping out from clenching his fists too tightly. There was dead silence in the restaurant. Everyone had panic written all over their faces. I don't know if we are lucky or unlucky. We found the sealed devil, but the seal is about to lose its effect. Michael said solemnly. End of chapter. Chapter 1765. The restaurant was silent, and the expressions of the representatives were somewhat shocked. They had yet to recover from Rex's strange and terrifying description of the Urba tribe's tragedy, and were frightened by Michael's words about the devil breaking out of the seal. The various representatives present were the representatives of the most powerful forces on the Norland continent. However, an even more powerful and terrifying existence had appeared above them. They were bloodthirsty and cruel, and had lived for countless years. They were powerful and terrifying. Apart from shock, Josh was also a little flustered. Are you the devil they're talking about? What exactly are you? Do you really want to destroy this world? Josh screamed in his heart, but that voice didn't give him a reply. That made his emotions even more chaotic. The statue he got came from the Urba tribe, and Rex's description made his hair stand on end. Although he hadn't completely handed over his soul to that fellow, they were almost in the same boat now. Could it be that there's something wrong with my senses? Irina stared at Josh with furrowed brows in confusion. She seemed to have sensed a trace of demonic aura from Josh, but she couldn't find anything when she checked carefully. Is there really a devil? Camilla whispered. What the hell is that? Dracula frowned too. It sounds very powerful. We are vampires, and ghosts too. We can't be frightened so easily, Dracula said calmly. City Lord Michael, you said you found the sealed devil. Where is that devil now? Can you bring us there to take a look? Richard asked with a serious expression as he stood up. As one of the representatives from the Roth Empire, Richard had the responsibility of assisting Josh. Josh had already laid out the Empire's cards, and was about to discuss the conditions that were most beneficial to the Empire with the various races, but Michael threw out the devil's words at this time. Yes, words are no proof. The history of the elves has never recorded the existence of any devil, Elliot chimed in. He was also in disbelief. The various representatives slowly came back to their senses, and looked at Michael in confusion. So many years had passed, and the various races had never heard of the existence of devils. Why would they suddenly appear? The sealed devil was discovered by Crassus and Julian. Because the seal was damaged, the devil's aura leaked out and was discovered. Michael explained, at the moment, they are still guarding the seal, trying to repair the seal and reseal the devil. However, the situation is not optimistic. The seal formation is too ancient, and analyzing the formation has become a big problem. Lewis and I went to the sealed land a few days ago. That fellow's power is far beyond our imagination. Once it escapes from the seal, it will be a terrible disaster for the Norland continent, Douglas said in a low voice with a grave expression. Lewis also said solemnly, although it's a little embarrassing, I still have to let you guys know how powerful it is. If it weren't for Crassus, Julian, Douglas, and Novan joining forces to save me, and the seal stopping it, I would have been killed by that fellow. Everyone was in an uproar, and they were once again filled with fear. Lewis was a very powerful being. He was one of the top 5 big shots on the Norland continent, but he was almost killed by the devil in the seal. Furthermore, he only managed to escape with the help of 4 10th-tier powerhouses. One could only imagine how terrifying that devil's power was. Richard's expression also changed slightly. His power was not even comparable to Crassus, let alone Lewis. If that devil was really as powerful as Lewis and the rest described, it would be a terrible threat to the Roth Empire, and not beneficial to His Majesty's plan to unify the world. With the help of Crassus and the rest, I once chopped off one of its tentacles. However, this was not even a small injury to it. It grew another tentacle in the blink of an eye. Meg threw out half of the frozen octopus tentacle. Everyone looked at that tentacle. The blood-red eyeball that was covered with tentacles was still very lifelike. Just looking at it was enough to make one feel terrified. What made everyone even more concerned was that Alex, who was said to be the strongest in close combat on the Norland continent, could only chop off one of that devil's tentacles with the help of Crassus and the rest. However, its terrifying regenerative ability could erase this kind of damage directly. It was chilling. Isn't this invincible? Connie swallowed her saliva and inched closer to Rex. Extremely difficult to deal with. Rex nodded with a grave expression. Invincible. Josh looked at Alex, and a red light suddenly flashed across his eyes. He clenched his fist subconsciously. Alex, who was almost invincible in his eyes, also had an opponent that he could not deal with at all. However, he had the chance to obtain the help of that existence. When it comes out of the seal, you will gain an extremely powerful friend. The familiar voice sounded in his mind again, and it was filled with bewitchment. Josh's lips began to curl up, and his hands that were hanging by his side trembled slightly. This fellow is indeed tainted with the demonic aura. Perhaps he has already exchanged souls with the devil? Irina narrowed her eyes. In that instant, she could clearly feel the demonic aura emanating from Josh's body. This meant that he might have exchanged souls with the devil, or he might have interacted with the devil before. That was because his situation was a little special. Compared to Borg, Alfred, and Ferdinand, who was lying on the ground, the demonic aura on Joshua was extremely faint. He did not show any signs of madness after being bewitched by the devil. Instead, he looked excessively normal. Therefore, she could not determine his situation at the moment. However, what she could be sure of was that he must have interacted with the devil before, and that was why he was tainted with the demonic aura. The 2 big bosses of the dragon tribe and Alex spoke one after another, which was equivalent to determining the nature of this matter. Given their status, they would not join forces to deceive the other races. Moreover, Crassus and the rest were also involved. There was no force that could make them so unified. Richard looked at Michael, and said, "City Lord Michael, since you have discovered the sealed land, can you bring us there to check it out? If what you said is true, and this matter concerns the safety of all the races on the Norland continent, we should also do our part." Words were not proof, and this matter might affect the king's decision. He had to see that so-called devil with his own eyes before he could report this matter to the king. The various representatives agreed. Although Alex and the rest had endorsed them, the devil's words were still beyond their knowledge. They would not believe it if they did not see it for themselves. Michael nodded, and said, "This matter is not something that Chaos City and the Dragon Tribe can solve alone. We urgently invited all the representatives here, and because of this, we have set up a teleportation portal in the Aiden Square that leads directly to the sealed land. Representatives, please come with me. Since this matter concerns all the races on the Norland continent, then we, Lantist, should also do our part." Right at this moment, a voice sounded outside the restaurant. The restaurant's door opened, and 10 merfolk powerhouses in silver armor stood at the door. Chapter 1766. Who are they? Everyone in the restaurant turned to look at the uninvited guests at the door in shock. The other party had 10 people, and all of them were 10th-tier powerhouses. The number of 10th-tier powerhouses was even more than the goblins and dwarves. All the races had sent their representatives, so who exactly were these powerhouses who claimed to be from Lantist? Michael also looked at the people at the door in shock, and instinctively looked at Meg. Outside of the major races, it was extremely difficult to assemble a team of 10 level 10 powerhouses. Moreover, there was not a single powerhouse among them that was well known to the public. 10th-tier powerhouses were the top existences on the Norland continent. Even the powerful giant dragons only had 30 to 40 10th-tier giant dragons. The Roth Empire relied on its huge population, and the Magus Tower and the Empire's Knight Academy spared no effort in nurturing them. The number of 10th-tier powerhouses was only similar to that of the giant dragons. A race with 10 10th-tier powerhouses was enough to have a place on the Norland continent. Elliot looked at the people at the door, and couldn't help but exclaim, Aren't they that group of mysterious powerhouses who appeared at the goblins' borders? Although they weren't wearing black uniforms today, their auras were the same. The battle at the underground cavern at the goblins' borders was a disgrace to the elves. The Wind Forest had sent out almost all of its elite troops and top powerhouses to besiege thousands of night elves, but it ended in defeat, and the elven marshal, Borg, died in battle. And what changed the outcome of this battle, which had no suspense at all, was the sudden appearance of a group of mysterious powerhouses who forcefully stopped the elves' attack and forced them to retreat. It was known in history as the incident of the thugs in suits. After their defeat, the night elves went south to build a stronghold in Chaos City, and triggered the slave revolt that had a greater impact on the elves. It could be said that if it wasn't for this group of mysterious powerhouses, Irina and the night elves would have been killed in the underground cavern at the goblins' borders, and the elves would have the power to fight for supremacy now. Of course, if it wasn't for this group of powerhouses, Borg might not have died, and he wouldn't have the right to sit here. The representatives of the various races looked at the people at the door in shock when they heard Elliot blurting out those words. Back then, the elves had lost the battle due to the huge disparity in power, but it had caused a sensation on the Norland continent. The identity of that group of mysterious experts had also become an unsolved mystery. To this day, no one knew. Today, it seemed that all of this would be revealed. The sudden emergence of a power with 10 10th-tier powerhouses was going to have a huge impact on the Norland continent. If they stood on the anti-war side, even the powerful Roth Empire would have to reconsider the feasibility of conquering the entire continent. Dexter led the powerhouses of Lantis through the door and stopped at the entrance. He didn't take any further action as he looked at Meg. Everyone subconsciously looked at Meg. The last time this group of mysterious powerhouses appeared was to rescue Irina and the Night Elves. At that time, Alex was also present. What was the relationship between them? I am Michael, the City Lord of Chaos City. May I know which race you are from? As the host, Michael had to understand this group of mysterious powerhouses that had suddenly appeared. Dexter didn't answer. Instead, he said something to Meg in Lantist. Meg nodded slightly. He turned to look at Michael, and said, "They are the people of Lantist. They came from the bottom of the boundless sea realm, and have been living under the sea for the past thousands of years. Now, they want to build a friendly relationship with the other races, so they asked me to bring them to this meeting." Under the boundless sea realm? The representatives of the demon race were all shocked. Who would have thought that there was such a powerful race living under the boundless sea realm? So, for the past thousands of years, we have been living on the island, and they have been living under the sea. They actually lived peacefully for so many years? Dracula said in shock. Maybe they don't want to go ashore, Camilla said calmly. The other representatives of the other races also had different expressions. According to Alex, Lantist should be a sizable race. They must have many powerhouses to be able to defeat the elven elites head-on. After Alex left the Roth Empire, he was almost alone. Irina's night elves were still young, and 30,000 elven slaves couldn't bring about significant combat power in a short period of time. No matter how powerful he was, he couldn't change the situation of the Norland continent. However, if this Lantist that had more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses stood on his side, the outcome would be completely different. Nobody knew how powerful Lantist was, and nobody knew how many powerhouses and tribesmen were hiding under the sea. The unknown was the most frightening. I see. Michael was deep in thought. Chaos City was also paying attention to that group of mysterious powerhouses at the goblins' border. He even asked Irina alone, but he didn't get any useful information. However, since Alex asked them to appear at this time, he must have the confidence to get them to stand on his side. It must be a good thing for the peace camp. Michael nodded, and said, "What we are discussing today concerns the future of all the races on the Norland continent. As one of the powers and races on the Norland continent, it would naturally be best if Lantist could live in peace with all the other races and participate in the battle against the devils." Meg conveyed Michael's words to Dexter. Dexter nodded solemnly, and said, "This concerns all the living beings on the Norland continent. We, Lantist, cannot stay out of this. We will definitely do our best for this." Meg conveyed Dexter's words, and explained, Lantist has never established contact with the land before, so they don't understand the common language. I can only convey it. All right. In that case, we will go to the sealed land first. The situation of the seal is very serious now, and we urgently need the help of all the races. Michael nodded, and walked out of the door first. Everyone followed suit. If such a terrifying devil really existed, Lantist's entry into the world would be a powerful helper for them. It was a good thing. I found demonic aura on Josh. There might be something wrong with him. Meg heard Irina's voice transmission at the door. Meg looked at Josh with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Given his status, why would he want to get involved with the devil when he and Sean's fight for the throne had yet to be decided? I will keep an eye on him. Once he tries to break the seal, we will be able to prove that he is under the devil's control, Irina continued. Meg nodded slightly. He was on high alert. If the seal was broken, not many people present would be able to escape. Chapter 1767. The temporary teleportation portal was located near the Batai prison in the Aden Square. The various representatives walked out of the restaurant under Michael's lead, and quickly stepped into a spell formation guarded by the Grey Temple Knights. Dozens of representatives stood in the spell formation with solemn expressions, and some uneasiness could be seen on their faces. The negotiations for the renewal of the peace agreement did not go smoothly, and the terrifying devil was like a wake-up call that caught the various representatives off guard. As for the sudden appearance of Lantist, it was still unknown what kind of role they would play on the Norland continent, but their appearance had already ruined all the plans of the various races. Vanessa, wait for us here, Josh said to Vanessa as he looked at her outside the spell formation. Can I not go? Vanessa asked worriedly as she glanced at the various representatives who had entered the spell formation. Josh nodded, and said, there might be unknown dangers. I might not be able to protect you. Just wait for us to come back in the restaurant. All right. Vanessa nodded. Then, she looked at Josh with concern, and said, then, big brother Josh, you have to protect yourself. I will wait for you to come back. All right. Josh nodded with a smile, and stepped into the spell formation. The various representatives had all entered the teleportation portal. Michael nodded at the spell formation master at the side, and the latter activated the spell formation. A faint golden light shone from the runes on the ground, and everyone disappeared on the spot. Then, they appeared in the underground cave in an instant. What is this? The golden light faded, and a huge mural appeared in front of everyone. The horrifying scene in the mural shocked the various representatives. The huge and terrifying indescribable creature in the middle of the mural, and the various races who had fallen into madness, made them subconsciously think of the tragedy of the Urba tribe that Rex had described. Fear shrouded everyone present. That bone-piercing chill was indescribable. What made the elves kill their own people? What made the giant dragons kill each other? What made them fall into madness? The answer might be that terrifying indescribable creature. Its huge body and tentacles that were filled with eyeballs made even the demons shudder. Master, are you all right? Connie grabbed Rex's sleeve fearfully. When she looked up, she realized that Rex's face was pale, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. I'm fine. Lex shook her head and shifted her gaze away from the mural. She said with lingering fear, back then, I saw the shadow of this object in the sky above the Urba tribe. When the various representatives heard this, their expressions turned even uglier. Could it be that the demon in the seal was the instigator of the tragedy of the Urba tribe back then? Josh looked at the mural with a worried and conflicted expression. Your Highness, we have to report this to His Majesty as soon as possible, Richard transmitted his voice to Josh, and there was a hint of fear in his voice. Joshua ignored him and continued to stare at the massive, indescribable object. Find an opportunity to release him, and you will gain an unparalleled friend. Everyone here will die, and the Norland continent will be ours. We will dominate everything. A seductive voice sounded in his ears. But he was hesitating. After seeing the mural, the determination that he had made countless times was shaken. This seems to be different from what we agreed on, Josh said as calmly as he could in his heart. If you want to obtain power, you have to pay a price. They're just some people used as sacrifices. Death is the best ending for them, and you're the one we've chosen. You'll become our spokesperson, and you can do whatever you want. Don't you want to kill that man? As long as you release him, he can help you kill him easily. And that elf, what a cute little beauty. As long as you are willing, she will be yours. Josh looked up at Alex and Irina. He clenched his fists with a complicated expression, and did not agree to that voice. Michael stood in front of the mural, and solemnly said to everyone, behind this mural is the sealed land. Although that devil is sealed in the spell formation, it can still control and attack people outside the spell formation with its mental power. So, after entering the cave, please do not go near the sealing spell formation. Do not stare at its eyes, and do not try to enter the spell formation to attack it. The various representatives nodded in agreement. After going through so much, everyone no longer underestimated this mural when they saw it again. They were all on high alert, afraid that they would fall into the devil's trap. Michael then turned to activate the switch on the stone door. Everyone looked nervously at the stone door that was slowly opening to the side. A sinister aura surged out crazily from the gap of the door. The magic caster took out his magic caster's staff and silently recited the spell for a protective barrier. The dwarves had shields in their hands at some point, and the goblins were consciously moving behind them. Dracula had already spread his wings, and was standing half a step in front of Camilla, shielding her behind him. Richard and a knight were also guarding Josh's sides, and looked at the stone door that was slowly opening with vigilance. The huge psychological pressure made the various representatives use their strongest life-saving means. Although Michael repeatedly emphasized that the devil was still sealed, he also told them that even if it was sealed, it could still attack them. Hurry up, I've waited until the flowers wilted. Ace. Can't afford it. Ace bomb. I'm a farmer. We're all farmers. You're using an ace bomb at the start of the game? I've never used an ace bomb in my life. Also, I don't know how to farm. Alright. You're the boss. The stone door slowly opened, and what everyone saw was not that terrifying, indescribable thing, but the trio of Crassus, Julian, and Barbara sitting in front of the stone door, warming themselves by the fire and playing cards. The moment the stone door opened, the various representatives outside looked at each other with nervous expressions, and the trio sitting on the ground with cards in their hands. The atmosphere was a little strange. Meg's mouth twitched, and he forced himself not to laugh. Can't afford it? After a while, Barbara came back to her senses and said, Can't afford it. Crassus followed. For twos. Julian continued to calmly throw his cards. The scene that they saw after the door opened was a little different from what the various representatives had imagined. Looking at Crassus and Julian sitting on the ground and playing cards with a little girl, they even felt that it was ridiculous. Even the terrifying atmosphere that made one's heart turn cold was somewhat destroyed at this moment. However, in the next moment, an ear-piercing scream rang through the cave. Chapter 1768. Although the scene after the door opened gave the representatives a sense of absurdity, it didn't stop them from paying attention to the terrifying, indescribable thing in the middle of the huge cave that was close to 1,000 meters tall. It was almost identical to the head of the indescribable thing in the mural. Countless tentacles extended out from a pile of flesh that looked like mud, and on those tentacles and flesh were scarlet eyeballs. They were densely packed, and shone with a demonic red light that filled the entire sealed space. The moment they stepped through the stone door, everyone felt as if they were being watched. That intense sense of fear made their scalps go numb, and the terrifying aura that rushed towards them made them feel as if they were facing an ancient ferocious beast. Dexter and the powerhouses of Lantis looked at that indescribable thing with a fearful expression. It turned out that there was an even more terrifying existence above the 10th tier. This was undoubtedly a huge shock to Lantis, who had lived in the deep sea for a long time. Meanwhile, that indescribable thing seemed to be enraged by the sudden appearance of the crowd. It let out a low, ear-piercing roar, and countless tentacles slammed towards the entrance of the cave. This scene made the representatives of the various races turn pale with fright. They stepped back instinctively, and at the same time, each of them took out their life-saving measures, afraid that they would be killed by that monster in a second. Only the three people who were still playing landlord at the side remained calm. You are too good at playing cards, Crassus said to Julian with a chuckle as he successfully played the last card. Boring thing. Julian placed the cards in his hand on the table, and the poker cards turned into dust together with the small square table. You are a little incompetent and furious. Crassus kept the money he won happily. I don't want to be a farmer anymore, Barbara said angrily as she threw the cards in her hand away. The representatives of the various races felt that the three of them didn't know what was good for them, but they couldn't help but want to laugh. How big of a heart did they have to be to play games around a bonfire in such a place? Bam! Countless tentacles slammed onto that light golden seal, and the seal that was already in a precarious situation became even worse. The barrier was almost transparent. Fortunately, the seal was still able to withstand the attack of the indescribable object. Accompanied by a series of corrosive sounds, the impact on the seal ended with hundreds of tentacles melting away. Only then did the various representatives, who had almost exited the cave, stop in their tracks. They looked at the flickering barrier with lingering fear. If this barrier had not withstood this attack, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Its tentacles are recovering quickly, Elliot exclaimed. Everyone looked over and saw that the tentacles that the indescribable creature had severed from attacking the seal were recovering at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few breaths of time, all the severed limbs had grown back, looking no different from before. What a terrifying recovery ability. The expressions of the various representatives were very solemn. This proved that what Alex had said before was not false. This octopus monster had a desperate recovery ability. So powerful. Josh was also unable to conceal the astonishment in his eyes. The aura of this indescribable being was far more oppressive than that of a 10th-tier powerhouse. It was an existence on a completely different level. People could only look up to it and fear it. Meanwhile, its terrifying recovery ability made it almost invincible. With its huge body and countless tentacles, even though it was trapped in the seal, it still looked invincible as it looked down on everyone outside the seal. There's actually such a monster in this world. Franklin, the Tyrannosaurus Rex, also had an ugly expression. Although he had already heard some news from Lewis and Douglas, he only knew how difficult it was to deal with after seeing this indescribable being with his own eyes. Look at your cowardly faces. If this fellow could escape now, would we still be sitting here playing Fight the Landlord? Crassus stood up and laughed mockingly at the various representatives who had retreated to the door. The various representatives had awkward expressions, but there were more than one or two who were frightened, so it was not that embarrassing. It was just an overreaction. This sealing spell formation can only last for 3 more days at most. If we can't decipher all the runes in the spell formation in 3 days and effectively reinforce and restore the spell formation, it will break the seal. Novan, who had been working beside the spell formation, walked forward with a grave expression. He looked at the various representatives standing in front of the cave, and said, "If there's anyone in your race who knows about ancient spell formations and runes, ask him to come to Chaos City immediately. Perhaps we still have a chance." 3 days? Everyone's expression darkened. Given this devil's terrifying power, it would definitely cause a terrifying disaster on the Norland continent once it escaped from the spell formation. Just like what was described on the mural, all the races would not be able to avoid it. Oster stood out, and confidently said, "Although this fellow looks quite powerful, its power must have decreased after being sealed for so long. We have over 20 10th-tier powerhouses here. If we attack it together, we will definitely be able to kill it." Everyone looked at each other, and no one responded for a moment. Josh stepped forward, and solemnly said, "I think Chief Oster is right. This devil concerns the safety of all the races on the Norland continent. Instead of pinning our hopes on this spell formation that could collapse at any time, why don't we join forces to kill it completely, and resolve the crisis at hand?" Everyone was shocked that Josh supported Oster, and they also began to seriously consider whether the two's words were feasible. The power of over 20 10th-tier powerhouses joining forces was self-evident. However, no one was very confident if they could really kill that devil. "I think it's feasible. This is just a monster that has lived for a long time. Since it can be sealed, it means its power is still limited. If we can join forces to kill it, that would be a good thing. Even if we can't kill it, we can at least weaken it a little, and allow the spell formation to last a little longer." Franklin walked out with a thick and black mace in his hand. He patted his chest heavily, and said, "Does anyone dare to fight this fellow with me?" "Me." Oster stepped forward. "The Roth Empire is willing to contribute." Josh stepped forward. Richard wanted to say something, but he still stepped forward with that knight to protect Josh. "The elves are also willing to contribute," Elliot said anxiously. Soon, all the representatives expressed their willingness to join Franklin in the battle with that devil. "All of you are really wise. If we can kill it, wouldn't the people who cut it into 2 and sealed it so painstakingly be fools?" Crassus said with a roll of his eyes. "That might not be the case." Franklin did not argue too much. He charged towards the spell formation with his mace, and the black scales turned into heavy armor that covered his entire body very quickly. He turned into a black whirlwind and crashed into the sealing spell formation. Chapter 1769. Franklin led the charge. Since the representatives of the various races had agreed to attack together, they naturally wouldn't be a hindrance at such a time. All of them attacked. Oster followed Franklin into the sealing spell formation. Behind them, all sorts of magic spells, charms, and secret techniques were thrown at the octopus monster in the middle of the seal. Crassus stood at the side to protect Barbara, preventing her from getting hurt. Julian stood at the side with his arms crossed. He didn't have the intention to attack either. Dexter looked at Meg, and the latter shook his head. He didn't move either, and stared at Josh. "Master, Connie had just opened her mouth when Rex had already pulled her out of the cave. He stood in front of her, and instructed, 'Don't look, don't listen.'" Lewis and Douglas looked at each other, and threw out 2 spells symbolically. Smack. Franklin, who was leading the charge, was hit by the mace on the tentacle. Sticky liquid and flesh flew everywhere. That tentacle was almost broken by his mace. However, in the next instant, 3 tentacles hit his chest hard. The dragon scale armor shattered instantly, and the black whirlwind dissipated. The thick mace was flung away. Franklin spat out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were filled with fear, but there were still several tentacles that wrapped around his body that was flying backward. At this moment, Oster rushed up with a black sword. He rolled into the tentacles like a black whirlwind. Several magic spells and secret techniques also blasted on the octopus monster. Dazzling rays of light burst out, but when they landed on the octopus monster, it was as if they had been thrown into a swamp. The attacks of several level 10 powerhouses did not cause any ripples. What a terrifying defense! Everyone was shocked. Such a strong defense that could withstand the attacks of 10th tier powerhouses without any damage was already beyond their imagination. However, the battle had already started. Franklin and Oster were still in the spell formation, and there was no way to stop it. At this moment, Josh pointed the magic wand that he had been guiding for a long time at the ceiling spell formation. An inconspicuous explosive fireball flew towards the spell formation amidst the dazzling attacks. However, it didn't fly towards the octopus monster directly. Instead, it flew towards the ceiling spell formation on the ground. There is indeed something wrong with him. Irina, who had been paying attention to Joshua, raised her hand and conjured up a shield of light in front of the exploding fireball. The fireball exploded, causing ripples on the light shield, but it did not damage the foundation of the array. Irina. Josh's heart jolted upon seeing the shield of light that had suddenly appeared, and he turned to look at Irina in reflex. Irina was looking at him coldly. Her pure blue eyes seemed to be able to see through the darkness and filth in his heart. Could it be that she could tell? Josh's heart thumped wildly, and he tried his best to remain calm, but his wand was trembling uncontrollably. What's the point? You clearly have the upper hand, yet you're not willing to wait patiently? Meg pursed her lips in confusion as she looked at Josh. His actions basically indicated that he had made a deal with the devil. Perhaps he hadn't sold his soul yet, but that was enough. At the same time, Franklin and Oster, who had entered the ceiling formation, fell into a predicament. Countless tentacles wrapped around them, and they were unable to escape on their own. Our attacks are unable to break through the defense. Save them! Michael shouted as he looked at the two people who were in danger in the seal. The dazzling holy light pierced into the seal, and that octopus monster let out a shrill roar. At the same time, Douglas and Julian activated the frost domain and ice seal at the same time. The wriggling tentacles slowed down immediately, but the ice seal was also disappearing rapidly. Dexter raised the crystal ball in his hand, and chanted an ancient and mysterious incantation. A monstrous wave slammed down, and a gap was opened in the tentacles that were blocking the two of them. Go! Franklin roared furiously, and turned to run out of the seal. Just as he was about to dash out of the spell formation, a tentacle that had broken free from the ice seal slapped him on the back, and sent him flying into the stone wall of the cave. As for Oster, who was surrounded by layers of tentacles, he was not so lucky. Before he could reach the edge of the spell formation, his left hand was entangled by a tentacle, and quickly coiled up his hand like a snake. Oh no! Everyone was shocked when they saw that. If they were dragged away by that octopus monster, the consequences would be unimaginable. Oster was also a ruthless person. Seeing that he could not break free, and that the other tentacles were swarming towards him, he clenched his teeth and raised his hand to chop off his left hand that was entangled by the tentacles. Then, he pounced out of the spell formation. Novan raised his hand, and forcefully pulled him out of thin air. Blood spurted out in a parabola, and he managed to break free from the tentacles that were about to entangle his leg. In the spell formation, that octopus monster used one of its tentacles to lift up Oster's broken arm, and swayed it as if it was showing off. Then, it threw it into that huge mouth that was filled with rows of sharp teeth. My hand, Oster was supported by someone, and let out a shrill scream as he pressed on his right hand that was chopped off. This is a monster. A terrifying monster. Franklin crawled out from the pile of rocks by himself. He looked at the octopus monster in the seal spell formation in horror as he spat out blood. The expressions of the various representatives were similar. They saw with their own eyes that Franklin, who was known for his destructive power, could not even break a tentacle with his full strength. Instead, he was almost killed by a tentacle? How could they play this game? This fellow had tens of thousands of tentacles. They were having a mental breakdown. The octopus monster attacked the seal spell formation to vent its anger. Looking at that flickering seal barrier, the various representatives were a little frightened. At this moment, they finally understood what this seemingly weak seal spell formation meant. Michael heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Looking at the expressions of the various representatives, he knew that the intimidation effect was achieved. Hence, he said, everyone has seen the devil and its power. This matter concerns the future and safety of the Norland continent. We need the cooperation of all the races in order to obtain the final victory. Now, let's go back to the restaurant first. The various representatives did not refuse. The atmosphere here was really a little oppressive and scary. They felt pressured every second they stayed, and couldn't wait to leave immediately. Hold on. Don't be in a hurry to leave. Irina walked out, and sneered at Josh. There's a traitor on the devil's side among us. If we don't find him and get rid of him first, I don't want to be stabbed in the back while I'm fighting for my life. Traitor? The various representatives looked at Irina in shock, and subconsciously distanced themselves from the people around them. Irina, you're not talking about me, are you? Josh looked at Irina in shock. He did not panic. Instead, he looked a little innocent and ridiculous. No pop-up window. Chapter 1770. Since you know it in your heart, then admit it openly. Irina stared straight at Josh. Her azure blue eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. The faint golden holy light landed on her, making her look like a goddess. Anyone could tell that Irina was targeting Josh. The various representatives looked at Josh and Irina with shock and uncertainty. The feud between the two of them was not rare on the Norland continent. There was a rumor in the early years that the king of the Roth Empire and the Elven Queen had discussed a marriage alliance. Josh and Irina might have already been engaged. It was said that it was because of this that Irina left the Wind Forest for the first time to travel the continent. That led to a series of legendary stories, as well as the many legends she left behind with Alex on the Norland continent. No one knew what Josh was thinking, but more than 3 years ago, Alex was ambushed in Rodu, and disappeared without a trace. There were rumors that he died on a rainy night. Irina went into seclusion, and there were no more legends about this heroic couple. The Roth Empire blamed it on an enemy's attack, but all the other forces knew about it. Furthermore, there were also people who were involved in the ambush on that rainy night. Weston retreated to a corner, and sized up Josh, Irina, and Alex carefully. Very few people knew that Alex and Irina had a daughter. She disappeared with Alex back then, and no one knew if she was dead or alive. Josh and Alex had a feud that would not end until one of them was dead. Irina obviously knew the truth, so he was not sure if Irina was trying to take revenge on Josh with the excuse of the devil, or if she had really discovered something. Everyone present had the same mentality, so they were cautious and did not rush to express their opinions. Irina, don't you dare slander His Highness the Second Prince, Richard shouted in a low voice. He stood protectively beside Josh and looked at Irina cautiously. The knight beside Joshua was also standing guard beside him with his sword in hand, and he appeared to be quite nervous. Perhaps there's some misunderstanding between us. This is the first time I've come here, and I've seen this demon. How can I be a traitor? Joshua did not try to hide anything. Instead, he looked at Irina in surprise. Perhaps you don't know, but the first person I came into contact with who exchanged souls with the devil was Borg. He attempted to use demonic energy to invade the Tree of Life and strengthen himself with it. In the end, his soul was controlled by the devil, so I killed him. Next was Ferdinand from the Fok tribe. He also exchanged his soul with the devil and released the devil in his heart. He plotted to kill his family, and I used the holy light to dispel the demonic aura on him. No one knows demons better than I do. The holy light will guide me. Irina raised the magic caster's staff in her hand, and a dazzling holy light began to condense. Irina, stop what you're doing now. If you attack the second prince for no reason, you and the night elves will have to bear the wrath of the Roth Empire. Richard shouted in a low voice as he raised his hand to form a magic barrier. At the same time, he pointed the magic wand in his hand at Irina. Irina, don't be rash, Michael also said. Everything happened so suddenly, and this was not part of their plan. Joshua was the second prince of the Roth Empire. Now that they were facing a great enemy, it was time for all the races to work together. If Irina really hurt Joshua and incurred the wrath and displeasure of the Roth Empire, it would be adding insult to injury. Since that's the case, I'll let you see what he did earlier. Irina tossed out an image recording stone. The image of everyone attacking the devil together appeared, and the focus of the image was on Joshua. When everyone was attacking the octopus monster from afar, Joshua released an explosive fireball. The fireball was mixed in with all the magic spells, but it did not fly towards the octopus monster. Instead, it slanted to the side and landed at the edge of the spell formation. However, at the instant that the fireball landed, a light shield appeared on the ground and absorbed all the power of the fireball. Everyone's expression changed drastically when they saw this scene. After experiencing the terrifying power of that devil, they had already realized the significance of this seemingly thin-ceiling spell formation. However, Joshua's explosive fireball just now almost destroyed the spell formation and killed everyone here. Everyone looked at Joshua with anger and questioning gazes. Even Richard and that knight from the Roth Empire had a slight change of expression. How did this happen? Josh's expression was not as calm as everyone else's. Instead, he looked at the image that was still playing on loop in midair with a look of disbelief as he muttered, "My attack was clearly aimed at that octopus monster, so why did it appear there? This is completely different from what I saw." "Stop pretending. I already felt that you were a little strange when we were at the restaurant," Irina said coldly with a frown. "Irina, I know you have resentment and misunderstandings towards me. I will explain it to you in the future. However, as the second prince of the Roth Empire, I have everything that others can't even dream of having. Why should I exchange my soul with the devil and become like Ferdinand, who is neither human nor ghost?" Joshua shook his head, and said sorrowfully and self-reproachfully, "I was too careless. Ever since I entered this cave, I had an inexplicable feeling of fear. I acted hastily just now because I wanted to do my part. Now that I see this scene, perhaps my mind was already controlled by that devil from the moment I entered the cave, and almost caused a disaster. I was too weak, and my mind was not strong enough. That gave the devil a chance to take advantage of me. Luckily, you noticed the abnormality and stopped the disaster from happening. If I had really released this devil, I would not be able to redeem myself even if I died 1,000 times." Joshua looked at Irina gratefully. He took 2 steps forward, and looked at her frankly. "If there is still demonic aura on me, or if I am possessed by an evil spirit, please use the holy light to expel it from me. I, Joshua, am magnanimous. I would rather die than be controlled and used by a devil. Your Highness." Richard wanted to go forward. "President, don't come forward." Joshua raised his hand to stop Richard. With a serious expression, he said, "This concerns the future of the Norland continent. I believe in Irina. If the devil really controlled me and I didn't know, I would really become a sinner for all eternity." Joshua's words were honest and sincere, and made the various representatives fall into deep thought. Even a top powerhouse like Lewis could be controlled by the devil. It didn't seem hard to understand that Joshua, who was only at the 7th tier, would be controlled by the devil to do such a thing. Meanwhile, Joshua's attitude made the crowd admire him. Those who dare to fight for the throne are indeed not simple. Meg looked at the honest Joshua, and frowned slightly. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 1771. Irina also furrowed her brows at the sight of Josh's magnanimous expression. His attitude was rather abnormal. She was sure that he had a relationship with the devil, and this relationship was not established after entering the cave. If that was the case, then why did Josh dare to let her baptize him with the holy light so openly? After being baptized by the holy light, Ferdinand was almost a cripple. The damage to his mind and body could not be healed. "I know I'm not good enough, and I'm not strong enough, but I hope I can always remain innocent." Josh looked at Irina, and his voice was gentle and affectionate. "Come, take it as me begging you. Use the holy light to cleanse my innocence. If you don't take precautions in advance, you will be easily controlled by this guy even if you are a 10th tier being." Lewis looked at Josh and nodded slightly. This child is not bad. He might have been targeted by the devil. As someone who had experienced it himself, he knew very well how terrifying the devil's mind control ability was. Therefore, he felt that the deduction that Josh was controlled by the devil at that moment, causing the direction of the bursting fireball to deviate, was plausible. There is such a possibility. Crassus nodded in agreement, and looked at Josh. He shouldn't be that stupid. The attitudes of the two of them more or less represented the thoughts of the various representatives. Josh's frankness won everyone's favor, and they felt that he was a tragic hero who sacrificed himself for justice. If you were only temporarily bewitched by the devil, then the holy light would cause very little damage to you. It would only disperse the demonic aura on your body. However, if you exchanged souls with the devil, then the holy light would strip the devil from your soul. By then, you would become a fool, Irina said coldly as she looked into Josh's eyes. "I believe I won't become a fool." Josh smiled gently, and straightened his chest. "Irina, I'm warning you. If you dare to cause any harm to His Highness Josh outside of the baptism, I will never let you off." Richard shouted at Irina coldly. Meg walked forward from the corner, stood beside Irina, and looked at Richard calmly. The two of them stood side by side. They were a perfect match, and everyone's attention was on them. Many people had already forgotten how majestic the two of them were when they roamed the continent. Wherever the holy light pointed, justice would be where it was. Today, the two of them once again stood side by side. They were still dazzling and eye-catching. Alex didn't say anything, but his imposing manner had already crushed Richard, who had just finished his harsh words. Within 3 meters, no one was faster than Alex, and no one could stop him. Josh's eyelids twitched, and he pursed his lips, but he didn't say anything else. With the enemy before us, what we need is trust. Since Prince Joshua is willing to prove his innocence, we'll have Irina baptize him with the holy light, and the truth will be revealed. As the host, Michael naturally couldn't let the situation turn into a stalemate. With a serious expression, he said, "There are more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses watching at the moment. We can guarantee absolute fairness. Please." Josh took another step forward and stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "All right, then I'll fulfill your wish." Irina raised the magic caster's staff in her hand, and a melodious chant rang out. "Holy light, please heed my call. Illuminate the darkness and purify all evil." A dazzling ray of holy light shot out from the magic caster's staff and landed on Josh's body. Wisps of black demon aura emerged from the top of Josh's head, and were disintegrated by the holy light. However, Josh's expression was rather calm. He just closed his eyes subconsciously, and there was no sign of pain on his face. The overflow of black demon aura lasted for less than 10 seconds. The holy light landed on Josh's body, and there was no more reaction. "There's not much demonic aura. It must have invaded his body when he was being controlled," Douglas said. The various representatives nodded. Judging from Josh's expression and the amount of black demon aura, it was as Douglas said. Josh did not exchange souls with the devil, and was only carelessly controlled by the devil earlier. Sure enough, His Highness is innocent. He's also a victim. Richard and the knight beside him were overjoyed and secretly relieved at the same time. How could this be? Irina frowned, but the holy light did not sense any more demonic aura on Josh's body. Although she was full of doubts, she had no choice but to retract the holy light. Meg took a deep look at Josh. He was not surprised by this outcome. Since he dared to take the initiative to accept the baptism of the holy light, it meant that he was not afraid of the holy light. The holy light receded, and Josh opened his eyes. He looked at Irina with clear eyes and smiled. "Irina, thank you. I feel like I've undergone a spiritual baptism, and my chaotic feelings are all gone. If you hadn't discovered and dispelled it in time, I'm afraid it would have led to an even greater disaster. No matter what method you used, it won't end like this." Irina put away her magic caster's staff, turned around, and walked out of the cave. Meg gave Josh a strange smile, and turned to follow Irina. "What were you smiling about?" Irina asked Meg. A pretentious smile can often bring great mental pressure to people. Meg smiled. "Actually, I don't know what I'm smiling about. I've made everyone worry." Josh apologized to the representatives of the various races. He looked at Meg's back view and felt a little depressed. The smile he left behind made him feel a little uneasy, as if he had seen through everything. It was as if he was watching a pitiful and clumsy clown's performance, and it drove him crazy. Prince Josh is not controlled by the devil, so let's drop this matter. Let's go back to the restaurant to discuss countermeasures. Michael ended the farce, and led everyone back to the restaurant through the teleportation portal. "Well, I haven't bathed for a few days. Can I go back with you?" Barbara hurriedly said. "My work is done. I can't help with the rest." "Of course. You are a hero who has made an outstanding contribution. Come back to the restaurant with us. You should receive your reward." Michael nodded with a smile. He knew very well what kind of contribution Barbara had made to the restoration of the spell formation during this period. "Then I'll also go to the restaurant for a meal, and see my precious disciple," Crassus said bluntly. "We can't let you see her alone." Julian followed him out. "If all of you leave, I have to go too. It's easy for problems to arise when I'm left alone. It's better to let the spell formation operate on its own." Novan walked out with a pile of drafts. He needed to make a trip back to the school to see if he could find any useful information in the library. The teleportation portal lit up, and there was no one in the cave. On the second floor of the restaurant, Irina looked at Meg, who was putting on an apron, and said, "There's definitely something wrong with Josh, but his problem is different from Borg and Ferdinand. He's a smart person." Meg, who had changed into his chef's uniform, put on the apron, and smiled at Irina. "But whether he made a deal with the devil or not, it doesn't stop me from killing him." "Your smile is very interesting." Irina was slightly stunned. Then, she couldn't help but pinch Meg's face. No pop-up window. Chapter 1772. Life was like a drama, and it all depended on acting skills. Meg, who had changed into his chef suit, transformed into the most popular male chef in Chaos City. In the end, Meg could not tell if he was acting as Alex or Meg, but from the looks of it, his acting skills were still very good. As for why he didn't choose to sit there and have a meeting like a big boss, but instead, he chose to work in the kitchen. It was all because of the booking fee. Passion. Yes, seeing the big bosses of various races unable to control themselves in front of delicacies gave him a great sense of achievement. Josh could not be killed for the time being. If he died in Chaos City, the racial war might start earlier. The biggest enemy of the Norland continent now was the unknown number of Great Old Ones. They were like time bombs hidden all over the continent that could explode at any time. Furthermore, it was the kind that could detonate the entire continent. As for Josh, even if he were to let him live for a while longer, he would only be keeping him alive. He wouldn't pose any threat to him. The royal family had been the most heartless since ancient times. If there had been even the slightest mistake in the ambush on that rainy night, he wouldn't have ended up like that. He did not intend to let any of the three fathers and sons off. It was already 10:30 am. Meg glanced at Irina, who was standing by the window, deep in thought, and went downstairs. Meg naturally couldn't appear in the restaurant directly. Hence, he climbed over the wall at the back and took a detour before riding his bicycle back to the restaurant's entrance. Yabamiya and Reina were already waiting at the entrance. They had arrived on time to prepare for lunch. "Mr. Meg, are you going to start preparing for lunch?" Dicus asked Meg with a smile. "Yes. We need to make some preparations in advance." Meg nodded with a smile. Dicus let everyone into the restaurant without hesitation. This was something that they had discussed before. When Meg and the rest entered, Vanessa, who was reading a gourmet magazine by the window, put down her book and walked over excitedly. She looked at Meg expectantly and said, "Mr. Mac, is the menu for lunch also open today? Including mutton kebabs?" "Yes." Meg nodded. "That's great. I've seen Randy's new column, and I'm drooling. I must try the lamb kebab this afternoon," Vanessa said happily. Meg glanced at the smile on Vanessa's face. She was probably the most carefree foodie representative among all the representatives. But that was fine as well. It was not her place to worry about such things anyway. Being a happy foodie was a very blissful thing. "Amy? Little Amy?" Just as Meg was about to enter the kitchen, a familiar voice came from the door. Crassus had already walked in and called out with a smile. "Little Amy isn't even at the restaurant." Julian walked in and glanced at the restaurant. He couldn't help but look a little disappointed. "Oh, it's the two teachers." The restaurant was booked by the City Lord's castle for a meeting today, so Amy went to her friend's place to play, Meg said without waiting for them to ask. "I see." Crassus was a little disappointed. He wanted to give little Amy a surprise. It's not a surprise when a teacher suddenly appears at home during the holidays. "It's a shock," Barbara said softly as she walked in. "I didn't give her any homework for the winter break." Crassus pursed his lips. "Boss, sisters, I'm back." Barbara didn't continue the conversation. Instead, she opened her arms and ran toward Yabamiya and the others. "Barbara." Yabamiya and the others were also surprised to see Barbara, who they had lost contact with for many days. The originally lively girl looked as if she had just crawled out of a coal mine. Her hair was a mess, and her clothes were dirty. It was a shock to see her. Upon seeing everyone's shocked expressions, Barbara hurriedly stopped in her tracks. She lowered her head to look at her clothes, and embarrassedly said, "Aya, I haven't showered for too long. I'm suffocating." "Barbara, where have you been these days? If you've been kidnapped, blink your eyes." Yabamiya held Barbara's hand and looked at her with concern and heartache. "No, I went to do something big." Barbara shook her head. She then looked at Meg and asked, "Boss, can I use the bathroom?" "Go ahead. I'll bring you some clean clothes in a while." Meg nodded with a smile. Seeing as Barbara had been working tirelessly to decipher the runes in the underground cave, he had no reason to turn her down. "All right." Barbara immediately ran upstairs happily. She removed the dirty clothes on her body and turned on the tap. As the hot water poured on her body, her tiredness was completely soothed. She couldn't help but heave a long sigh of relief. "I'll leave your clothes outside. After you shower, go soak in the bathtub for a while. Remember to come down for dinner later. I'll prepare more kebabs for you." Meg's voice came from outside. "All right," Barbara replied happily. She looked at the bathtub that automatically filled with water. This treatment was really great. Meg went downstairs again. The various representatives had also returned to the restaurant under Michael's lead. However, compared to their high-spirited appearances when they had just left, the various representatives who had returned to the restaurant were clearly in a sorry state. They were like frosted eggplants, and everyone's face was filled with worry. Oster, who had lost an arm, sat with a dark face. His wound had stopped bleeding, but that severed arm was eaten by the octopus monster. He couldn't regrow his severed arm, so he would only be left with one arm for the rest of his life. It was inevitable that his power would decrease. Franklin didn't look too good, either. His injuries were slightly better than Auster's, but his front and back were beaten up by the devil, so he didn't feel too good. He needed some time to recuperate. "Big brother Josh, are you hurt? Did you guys get attacked?" Vanessa also noticed the strange atmosphere, and asked the pale-faced Josh nervously in a soft voice. "Don't worry. It's just a small injury." Josh smiled at Vanessa, but didn't tell her what had happened earlier. "What happened to them?" Yabamiya asked softly in the kitchen. These people were the most powerful group of people on the Norland continent. Why would they be injured? Gina shook her head. She was also puzzled. "Do what you're doing. Don't talk too much," Meg said softly. Yabamiya immediately kept quiet, and helped to carry the plates. Michael looked at the various representatives, and solemnly said, "Everyone has seen the situation. I believe everyone knows how serious it is. We urgently need to decipher the remaining dozens of runes. The formation masters from the giant dragons and Chaos City can't do anything about it. Now, we can only see if there are any formation masters or researchers in the ancient books who can decipher it." Chapter 1773. After witnessing and experiencing the horror of the devil, the various representatives had a deep understanding that the various races of the Norland continent had already become a community with a shared destiny. Even giant dragons couldn't face such a terrifying enemy alone. Everyone's conversation was a little gloomy, but the various representatives quickly reached a consensus. They obtained a set of runes that needed to be analyzed from Novan, and prepared to send it back to their respective races as soon as possible. They had to repair the spell formation within 3 days to solve this urgent problem. "Principal Novan, if we can't analyze all the runes in this spell formation within 3 days, will it break out of the formation? Will it not be able to do without a single rune?" Sally asked Novan. The various representatives also looked at Novan with concern. "Yes. This seal spell formation is very complicated. It is made up of tens of thousands of runes. If there are a few runes that can't be analyzed, then it can't be repaired or reinforced. Any small mistake could cause this spell formation to collapse." Novan nodded with a serious expression. "If that's the case, then we can only wait like this? I'm afraid it's very difficult to analyze such ancient runes in such a short time. There might even be runes that can't be analyzed at all. What should we do then?" Sally continued to ask. "We can't place all our hopes on this rune." "Yes. Princess Sally's thoughts coincide with mine." Novan nodded. He looked at the various representatives, and said, "In the past few days, apart from analyzing the spell formation masters from Chaos City and the giant dragons have already set up countless sealing spell formations outside the sealed land. However, according to this devil's power, these sealing spell formations can only cause some hindrance to it, but not seal it." The expressions of the various representatives became even more serious. "Therefore, apart from requesting the spell formation masters from the various races to come to Chaos City, I think we should gather all the top powerhouses on the Norland continent to Chaos City to prepare for the situation when that devil breaks out of the seal," Novan said in a low voice. "This battle may be unavoidable. We have to make preparations in advance." Sally stood up with a serious expression, and said, "The elven race is willing to fight for the Norland continent." "Sally." Elliot looked at Sally, and opened his mouth anxiously. However, there was nothing he could do. The dwarf representative also stood up, and solemnly said, "Isen Castle can fend off all enemies, but we don't have the confidence to fend off this monster. Since we can't avoid it, we dwarves are willing to fight for the Norland continent." Dracula put down his glass and said with a smile, "Evil is really disgusting. The vampires can't stand it either. We are willing to fight with you." Lewis stood up and said, "The giant dragon race has already unified their statements. If that devil really breaks the seal, the giant dragon race will fight with all their might. The Falk tribe is willing to join the war." Connie stood up with clenched fists. She had to take revenge. "The August tribe will also kill that son of a bitch." Oster slammed the table angrily. The representatives of the various races expressed their support for joining forces against the demons. In the end, only the Roth Empire was left. Everyone turned to look at Joshua. "I'm sorry. This is not something I can decide. I will report this to the king immediately. I believe His Majesty won't sit back and do nothing," Joshua said apologetically. Out of caution, he didn't make the decision on behalf of the Roth Empire. "All right. Since everyone has decided to join forces against the enemy, apart from gathering more spell formation masters to Chaos City, please also ask the powerhouses of the various races to prepare to reinforce Chaos City. The war could start anytime. Michael nodded, and continued, then, we need to discuss how to join forces against the enemy. We paid a terrible price in that cave today, but we didn't cause any substantial damage to that devil. This means that normal means can't kill it. The various representatives began to discuss how to deal with that devil with solemn expressions. So far, the holy light spell should be the most effective and harmful magic against that devil. However, even if I cast it with all my might, I still couldn't cause any fatal damage to it. Furthermore, there are very few magic casters who know the holy light spell, Irina said. The Magus Tower has 3 light-type magic casters who know the holy light spell. I will ask them to come with the team, but they are only 6th tier or 7th tier, Richard said. The elves have 2 magic casters who know the holy light spell. They can also come as reinforcements, Sally said. That's far from enough. Irina shook her head. The 2 light-type magic casters in the elves were also only 6th tier or 7th tier. The damage they could cause to that devil was limited. Everyone fell into a gloomy atmosphere again. I've never felt so aggrieved in my life. Franklin hammered his thigh angrily. Meg looked at everyone who had fallen into a tense atmosphere, and interrupted, it's lunchtime. Would you like to order? Everyone looked at Meg with furrowed brows. This boss really doesn't know how to read people's faces? They were discussing the survival of the Norland continent now. Was this the time to eat? I want 20 mutton skewers and an insanely spicy grilled fish, Vanessa said without hesitation. Insanely spicy again? All the representatives looked at each other. They thought of the insanely spicy hot pot in the morning, and suddenly felt their hearts burning. However, their stomachs were craving food again. After thinking about it carefully, there was no point in staying in such a tense atmosphere. They might as well eat something to calm themselves down. Then, they would have the energy to continue the discussion. Give me a roast duck. I've been down there for so many days. My taste buds are getting bland, Crassus said without hesitation. A savory tofu pudding, and a braised chicken and rice, Julian said. Do you want hot pot again? Lewis asked Jinx, who was beside him. No. Jinx shook his head like a rattledrum. How about the insanely spicy grilled fish? Jinx glanced at Vanessa. I can't afford it. Jinx glared. Now, whenever he heard the word insanely spicy, he would feel his anus tighten. Useless. Lewis pursed his lips, and then said, a large mildly spicy grilled fish. I'm sorry, but the spicy grilled fish starts at the medium spicy level, Meg said with a smile. Lewis pondered for a moment before nodding in a serious manner. All right, I'll have a medium spicy grilled fish then. The representatives learned their lesson, and didn't order from Vanessa anymore. This young lady looked weak, but her taste was extraordinary. They each chose a dish that they thought was good, and prepared to try something new. Here, 10 servings of beggar's chicken, Dexter said. Dexter said in the broken common. All the representatives looked over. All right. Meg nodded with a smile. He wasn't too surprised. This was Lantist's holy chicken, after all. If he had the chance to eat at the restaurant, it would naturally be his first choice. Right at this moment, a golden array formation light suddenly lit up in the middle of the empty space surrounded by tables. Barbara! Father is here to save you! Following that, an angry roar sounded. Chapter 1774. The sudden appearance of the teleportation portal and that energetic shout stunned all the representatives present. They looked at Michael instinctively, thinking that this teleportation portal was also arranged by Michael. Michael was equally bewildered. The city lord's castle didn't arrange a teleportation portal in Mamie's. Even the teleportation portal to the sealed land was arranged in the plaza. How could they arrange a teleportation portal at Mr. Mac's place? Mag faltered slightly at the sight of the spell formation before his eyes quickly lit up. The combination of Babla and Father revealed far too much information. Furthermore, Babla had come to the Norland continent through this ancient teleportation formation beneath the restaurant. As the Moon Nation's beloved princess, the king of the Moon Nation wouldn't sit by and do nothing after she mysteriously disappeared through the teleportation portal. Barbara had been trying to restart the teleportation portal for the past few months, but she had always failed. Now that the ancient teleportation portal had been activated again, and the person hadn't arrived yet, but such a figure had already appeared. He couldn't help but think about it. A golden light flashed, and a group of people appeared in the empty space where everyone was sitting. Among them were swordsmen holding heavy swords with both hands, magic casters holding magic caster staffs, and defense-type warriors carrying heavy shields. All of them were guarding the middle-aged man standing in the middle of the group, who was wearing a gorgeous golden robe and a golden gemstone crown. There were 10 people in the group, and 6 of them were 10th-tier powerhouses. Which faction is this? The various representatives were a little confused when they saw this group of people who had suddenly appeared. They had just barely accepted the existence of Lantist, and now a group of unfamiliar and mysterious powerhouses had suddenly appeared. Was there an end to this? Meg's gaze landed on the middle-aged man with the crown. His brows and eyes were similar to Barbara's, but the most important thing was the light pink crescent between his brows, which was more obvious than Barbara's. He was definitely his biological father. Meg was basically certain of his judgment. The people from the Moon Nation were also a little confused at this moment. They had thought of the possible situations that might happen after they entered the teleportation portal, such as countless terrifying unknown creatures and an extremely difficult living environment. However, the current situation seemed to be a little different from what they had imagined. After the teleportation was completed, they were actually trapped in a terrifying encirclement. There were more than 20 level 10 experts who were eyeing him covetously. They were of different shapes and races, but they all possessed undeniably powerful auras. It was a hellish start. "Protect the king," the white-haired great magician shouted in a deep voice. He raised his hand and a magic barrier enveloped everyone. At the same time, he said in a low voice, "Restart the teleportation array. We have to leave this place immediately." Everyone gripped their weapons tightly. Although they were in great danger, no one retreated. They were prepared to sacrifice themselves to protect the king. Although they did not know where they had been teleported to, they were outnumbered, and it was not suitable for them to fight. The most important thing was to escort His Majesty away safely. "Wait." Kenneth waved his hand and stopped the formation master from restarting the formation. He said in a deep voice, "I won't return until I find the princess. Your Majesty, this place is extremely dangerous." The great magician tried to persuade him. "There's no need to say any more." Kenneth interrupted the great magician's words. He scanned the people present and the surrounding environment with his gaze. This place looked like a meeting hall. The powerhouses present should be having a meeting here, and not here to ambush them. Otherwise, their weapons would not be by their side, but in their hands. Moreover, the people present were a mix of races. There were elves, forest trolls, dwarves, goblins, and ferocious-looking demons that were recorded in ancient books. They did not seem to be from the same force. After being stunned for a moment, the representatives of the various races looked at the people who were preparing for battle. They also took out their weapons and prepared for battle. Everyone was already worried about the demons. Now that a group of people with unknown origins had suddenly appeared, they naturally had to be on their guard. For a moment, the atmosphere in the restaurant was tense, and swords were drawn. Could it be? Crassus looked at the people who had come, but his eyes lit up. He looked at Julian who was sitting beside him. "It's the same aura." Julian nodded. His cold face also brightened up a little. "Who are you?" Michael asked in a deep voice. He did not know the identity of this group of powerhouses who had mysteriously barged in. "Where is this place? Who are you? If you're the ones who kidnapped my daughter, quickly send her here. If she's fine, I won't hold it against you," Kenneth said coldly. "Daughter?" The representatives of the various races frowned. "Where is Barbara now? Why don't I see her? With her abilities, she's definitely not a match for this group of people." Kenneth looked anxious when he saw that no one answered. Sorry to interrupt." Meg walked forward and said. Everyone looked at Meg. This restaurant owner seemed to be reckless. He actually dared to walk forward in the face of such a group of mysterious powerhouses. "Do you know where my daughter is?" Kenneth's gaze landed on Meg like two sharp swords. "If I didn't guess wrongly, Uncle, your daughter should be called Babla, right?" Mag said to Kenneth with a smile as he looked at him fearlessly. "How did you know?" Kenneth's face darkened. "What did you do to her?" "What do you mean, what did I do to her? What kind of person do you take me for? I've clearly helped you raise your daughter very well." Meg rolled his eyes and smiled. "Your daughter is great, beast." Kenneth exploded instantly. The pink moon on his forehead lit up, and a set of golden and pink armor appeared on his body. He looked like he was going to fight Meg to the death. "Huh?" Meg raised his eyebrows. This king of the Moon Nation did not seem to be playing by the rules. He had clearly taken in his daughter out of kindness, but what was he planning to do now? "Ha!" Irina chuckled and raised her magic caster's staff to cast a light shield on Meg. "Father!" Just then, a surprised cry came from the staircase. Barbara. Kenneth, who was charging forward, stopped instantly. He turned around abruptly and looked at the figure that he had been thinking about all this time at the staircase. His eyes were filled with surprise. "It's me." Barbara rushed over like a whirlwind and threw herself into Kenneth's arms. "Child, father is late." Kenneth hugged Barbara tightly and said with joy and guilt, "Your Highness." When the people of the Moon Nation saw this, they were also delighted. However, they did not let down their guard against the people around them. They are father and daughter? When the representatives of the various races saw the scene, they were surprised, but they also withdrew their hostility. "Tell father, did he bully you?" Kenneth's gaze was still looking at Meg, but it was less hostile and more scrutinizing. Chapter 1775. Barbara had activated the teleportation portal and left the Moon Nation alone for more than 2 months. What Kenneth was most worried about was that Barbara, who had lived in the palace since she was young, and had been pampered and cared for in every way, would encounter bad people. However, seeing that she didn't have any injuries on her body now, and although she had changed her clothes, her mental state and appearance looked good. She didn't look like she had suffered, so Kenneth felt much more relieved. "You mean boss?" Barbara glanced at Meg, and shook her head with a smile. "No, boss and everyone treated me very well. I had a good time here." Meg heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Luckily, this last didn't spout nonsense. Otherwise, it would be bad if she was targeted by the Lord of the Moon. Moreover, the head of his family was also watching at the side. "Boss." Kenneth frowned. He looked at Barbara, and then at Meg. "I've been working as a waitress in the restaurant during this period. I'm in charge of the very important task of serving dishes," Barbara said proudly. Barbara boasted, "I'm using spatial magic to carry the dishes. They're fast and steady." "Serving dishes?" Kenneth's eyes widened, and there was a hint of anger on his face. The various representatives who had more or less figured out the relationship between everyone also gave Meg sidelong glances. He actually let a princess serve dishes in the restaurant as a waitress. This restaurant's owner was really brave. His courage was commendable. Or rather, he was really awesome. "How dare you, unruly commoner! How dare you let Her Highness do such a low-level job?" that great magic caster shouted in a deep voice. He glared at Meg angrily, and wished he could kill him with a punch. This is the job that she chose herself. Meg was very calm. What was so strange about a princess serving as a waitress? Didn't the elven princess wash the floor here before? The chief of the Fok tribe had even delivered takeout before. The princess of the vampire tribe cut bread, and the princess of Lantist was in charge of coaxing children. Was the princess of the Moon Nation more advanced? "Master, don't be angry. I'm just applying what I've learned. I didn't know what spatial magic was used for, but now that I've discovered that it can be used to carry dishes, it's indeed very convenient," Barbara said with a smile. This. The Archmage looked at Barbara with a complicated expression. He was so angry that he couldn't say anything for a long time. He could only sigh. "As long as Princess is happy." Meg looked at the great magician with some pity. He suddenly understood his anger. To have such a disciple, it was a blessing to not be angered to death. "He really didn't force you?" Kenneth looked at Barbara and asked. "Of course, the boss is just an ordinary person. If I want to leave, how can he stop me?" Barbara nodded and smiled. "I kept it for myself." The restaurant is great. The ladies here are all geniuses, and the boss's cooking is delicious. I'm very happy to stay here. "That's great. Now Sister Barbara can go home," Gina said softly. "Yeah, she can go back and be a princess again. However, I'm a little reluctant to part with her." Mia nodded and looked at Barbara reluctantly. Kenneth had already confirmed that Barbara didn't suffer in this world. He finally felt relieved. He bowed slightly to Meg and gratefully said, "I apologize for offending you earlier. I'm King Kenneth of the Moon Nation. Thank you for taking in my daughter and protecting her." The people from the Moon Nation also bowed to Meg. "You're welcome. Barbara is a great employee, and also our friend," Meg quickly said. He was a little caught off guard by Kenneth's sudden change in attitude. "I came in a hurry this time, so I didn't have time to prepare a gift for you. I'll bring my daughter home today, and I'll come again with a gift to thank you next time." Kenneth looked at Meg and then turned to look at the various representatives in the restaurant. "Please forgive us for disturbing you. We'll leave now and not disturb you." As he spoke, the Formation Master had already started to activate the teleportation portal. The various representatives looked at the people from the Moon Nation who came in a hurry and left in a hurry. They couldn't react in time. "Wait a minute." Barbara, who was holding on to Kenneth's arm, suddenly jumped out of the range of the teleportation portal. "Barbara, we should go back." Kenneth reached out his hand to Barbara. There were too many powerhouses here, so it wasn't wise to stay for long. "Father, I came back especially for dinner. I'm starving now. Why don't you wait for me to have a meal first before we go back?" Barbara pouted and acted coquettishly. Her stomach even made a growling sound at the right time. "After we go back, I'll get them to prepare a table full of your favorite food, including endless roast meat," Kenneth said dotingly. "No way. Their culinary skills are far worse than Boss. I've been craving mutton kebabs and beef kebabs for a long time." Barbara shook her head firmly. She jumped out of the circle of the round table and took a few steps back. "This child?" Kenneth looked at Barbara helplessly. He didn't expect that he wasn't as important as a serving of roast meat. "Everyone, there's no need to leave in a hurry. We're the representatives of the various races on the Norland continent. We didn't expect to meet the people from the Moon Nation here for a meeting today. If King Kenneth doesn't mind, you can sit down and have a meal with the people from the Moon Nation. Take it as a token of appreciation from the Norland continent," Michael said to Kenneth with a smile. The only key to solving the Norland continent's problem might be with the people from the Moon Nation. Of course, they couldn't just leave like that. It's indeed the Norland continent? Kenneth was certain. In the past few months, apart from repairing the teleportation portal, they had also read various ancient books and made many deductions about the teleportation destination. Among them, they deduced that the other end of the teleportation portal might be on the Norland continent. There weren't many records about the Norland continent in the ancient books. They didn't even know if it existed. However, the successfully repaired teleportation portal connected the Moon Nation and the Norland continent. "Don't worry, Royal Father. This city lord isn't a bad person," Barbara said to Kenneth. "Of course, we can't rule out whether the others are bad people. All right, then we'll have to impose on you." Kenneth wasn't a timid person. Since Barbara didn't want to leave in a hurry, he didn't force her. He nodded and agreed to stay. The staff at the city lord's castle got busy immediately. They added a few more tables for the people from the Moon Nation to sit down. Everyone sized each other up, and wasn't in a hurry to speak. Josh's gaze swept across the people from the Moon Nation, and he frowned. The sudden addition of the two major powers, the Moon Nation and Lantist, was not a good thing for the Roth Empire that wanted to conquer the entire continent. "Royal Father, take a look at this menu. Let me tell you, my boss's cooking is really superb. Roast mutton kebabs, roast beef kebabs, red braised pork." Kenneth was still thinking about how to officially interact with the forces on the Norland continent when Barbara had already started recommending the dishes to him with the menu. No pop-up window. Chapter 1776. Meg was busy in the kitchen, preparing food for the guests while observing the people from the Moon Nation at the same time. They were fretting over how to repair the seal when the people from the Moon Nation teleported over so coincidentally. To the current situation, they were no different from heavenly soldiers. One had to know that Barbara had contributed greatly to the analysis of most of the seal's spell formation during this period of time. The Moon Nation had preserved a batch of ancient books and inheritances passed down from ancient times. This was something that no race on the Norland continent could produce. Now that her master was here, and there were a few spell formation masters accompanying him, they could only rely on them to repair the seal within 3 days. Under Barbara's strong recommendation, the Moon Nation's delegation had 10 beef kebabs and mutton kebabs each, and ordered whatever they wanted to eat for themselves. "Have you revealed your identity to them?" Kenneth and Barbara asked softly. "No. Before this, only the boss and my friends knew." Barbara shook her head, and also softly said, "But I've been helping to save their world these few days, so I can sit and eat with them." "Save the world?" Kenneth was a little puzzled. Although Barbara was extremely talented in spatial magic, she was still young, and was only at the 7th tier now. Given her ability, it wouldn't be her turn to save the world, right? Moreover, she had to sit and eat with a group of 10th tier powerhouses at the same table. "I'll talk to you about this later." Barbara brushed it off, and then asked if her mother was well, and if anything interesting happened in the Moon Nation. Although Kenneth was puzzled, he had finally found his daughter, so he naturally had to pamper her. Thus, he started to talk to her about some of the things that had happened recently. Michael had originally planned to get in touch with Kenneth first to get closer so that he could ask for their help later. However, seeing that the father and daughter were talking so enthusiastically, he didn't rush to ask. The various representatives couldn't figure out the background and attitude of Kenneth and his group, so they didn't say much. The existence of the Moon Nation had always been a legend. When they looked up at the starry sky, they would often wonder if there was really life on the moon. However, when the passageway between the Moon Nation and the Norland continent was opened, and the people of the Moon Nation really came to the Norland continent, all of the races became even more wary and worried. No one knew how powerful the Moon Nation was, but the vanguard they sent out to search for the princess had 7 10th-tier powerhouses. It was clear that they were stronger than the average race. If they tried to migrate to the Norland continent, or if they wanted to own a piece of land on the Norland continent, it would greatly affect the situation on the Norland continent. Everyone had their own thoughts. For a moment, no one spoke as they quietly waited for the dishes to be served. However, Novan changed his seat and sat beside the great magic caster from the Moon Nation. He pulled out a piece of paper that was filled with runes, and smiled as he said, "Hello, I'm Novan. Can I ask you about these runes?" Jonas glanced at Novan with a hint of surprise in his eyes. This man who looked slightly disheveled was actually also a 10th-tier great magic caster. Furthermore, judging from the magical waves emanating from him, he should also be a spatial magic caster. After a moment of hesitation, Jonas still took the piece of paper. He glanced at the runes on it, and couldn't help but let out a soft gasp. He looked at Novan, and said, "Where did you find these runes? It seems like they should be used on a spell formation." Everyone looked over. They knew what Novan was holding, but they didn't expect this great magic caster to be able to see the origin of these runes at a glance. They wondered if he could decipher the rest of the runes. Novan's eyes lit up, and he continued to ask, "These ancient runes were copied from an ancient sealing spell formation. I wonder if Master knows what they mean?" "I know a little, but the runes have to be placed in a complete spell formation for them to be meaningful. If we dissect and analyze them separately, we might misunderstand their meaning." Jonas nodded. Over the past few months, they had flipped through countless ancient books in the Moon Nation before successfully repairing that ancient teleportation spell formation. Hence, they had some understanding of most of the runes on this piece of paper. "To be honest, we're currently in big trouble. A powerful and terrifying devil was sealed in ancient times, but it has survived until now. Now, this sealing spell formation can no longer continue to seal it because it's too old. We have to reseal it before it breaks out of the seal and escapes. Otherwise, the Noran continent will encounter a terrifying calamity." Novan stood up and solemnly said to Jonas, "I sincerely hope that everyone can help us repair the sealing spell formation and reseal that devil." Jonas, Kenneth, and the rest were surprised to hear that. They had just arrived here, and didn't even know what kind of existence the other party was. They didn't expect Novan to make such a request to them. A terrifying devil that has survived from ancient times until now? Jonas frowned as he recalled some ancient legends that he had read during this period of time when he was flipping through ancient books. Among them, there were fragments of some powerful god sealing terrifying devils. "Royal Father, Master, what Principal Novan said is true. That fellow is super terrifying. If we let it escape, I don't think we'll be safe even if we bring it to the moon." Barbara kept her smile, and with a serious expression, she said, "I've been helping them to analyze the runes of that sealing spell formation these few days. These are the runes that we can't analyze, and we're stuck in a deadlock. Now, Master, you're here. You're the best spell formation masters in the Moon Nation. You definitely have a way to reseal that fellow." Jonas didn't rush to answer. Instead, he looked at Kenneth. "You're saying that devil is even more powerful than 10th-tier powerhouses?" Kenneth asked Barbara. "It's more than powerful. Just now, more than 10 10th-tier powerhouses joined forces to attack that devil sealed in the spell formation. In the end, that devil was unscathed. One of their arms was broken, and 2 of them almost died," Barbara said with a nod. She still had some lingering fear. "Tisk!" Everyone from the Moon Nation gasped. More than 10 10th-tier powerhouses joined forces, but they couldn't do anything to that devil. How terrifying was that devil's power? "Is what my daughter said true?" Kenneth looked at Michael. He should be the one who had more right to speak among these people. "Yes, what Princess Barbara said is not false at all. That devil's power far surpasses ours, and it has extremely strong magical and physical resistance. The only way now is to reseal it, and then find a way to kill it," Michael said solemnly. Chapter 1777. The current predicament was no longer something that the Norland continent could overcome by putting up a strong front. Hence, Michael and the rest decided to request help from the moon civilization that they had just come into contact with. Kenneth fell into deep thought after hearing that. He didn't doubt the truth of what Barbara and Michael said. The existence of the devil was as mysterious as the existence of a bigger world outside the Moon Nation to the people of the Moon Nation. However, they were standing on the Norland continent now, so the existence of the devil didn't seem so unacceptable anymore. Furthermore, there was a teleportation portal between the Moon Nation and the Norland continent, and they could communicate in a similar language. This meant that there might be some connection between the two since ancient times, and they might even be of the same origin. Kenneth didn't agree immediately, and asked Michael, "Can you bring us to check out that so-called sealing spell formation and the devil?" "Of course." Michael nodded. Kenneth's caution wasn't hard to understand. Wait a minute. Barbara reached out to pull Kenneth, who was about to get up, and quickly said, "Don't be in such a hurry. The boss will be done cooking soon. It won't be too late for us to go after we eat." "You only know how to eat." Kenneth stroked Barbara's head affectionately, and shook his head. "Eating is just a matter of filling the stomach. If the situation is really so serious, this matter is obviously, the mutton skewers are ready." Right at this moment, Yabamiya walked out with a few long plates that were piled up into a small hill, and placed them in front of the people of the Moon Nation one by one. The rich aroma of roasted mutton wafted over immediately. The roasted mutton had just been placed on the grill, and the glistening fatty meat was still sizzling with oil. The surface was sprinkled with a handful of cooked sesame seeds and tender green onions. Gulp. Kenneth's Adam's apple moved obviously. He looked at the big plate of roasted mutton skewers in front of him, and couldn't take his eyes off of it. He paused in the middle of his sentence, and hesitated for a moment before continuing, "This matter can obviously be put aside first. I haven't eaten with you for a few months. Father isn't in a hurry to leave. Let me accompany you for a meal first." Everyone in the Moon Nation looked at Kenneth with admiration. His Majesty is wise. "Father, are you serious?" Barbara raised her eyebrows in disbelief. "Of course." Kenneth nodded calmly, but his gaze was fixed on the kebab. "All right, for the sake of these mutton skewers, I'll pretend to believe you." Barbara shrugged and picked up a skewer of mutton. She bit off a piece of meat and chewed happily. Freshly roasted mutton was the most delicious. Kenneth nodded slightly at Michael, and then picked up a mutton skewer without standing on ceremony. The roasted mutton of this world was quite special. Perhaps due to the lack of resources, the mutton was cut into small pieces and skewered on bamboo skewers, unlike the Moon Nation which roasted it whole. However, the flaws couldn't obscure the beauty of the meat. He had to admit that the rich aroma of the mutton was indeed more enticing than the roast mutton made by his family's imperial chef. Furthermore, there wasn't the slightest hint of the rank odor of mutton. Just this point alone was enough to show that this chef was better than his family's imperial chef. The food that Barbara was so infatuated with must be delicious. With the mentality of trying it out, Kenneth took a bite of the mutton. The mutton that had just been taken off the grill was still a little hot, and the surface was slightly charred, but the inside was exceptionally tender. When he bit into it, the gravy of the meat immediately splashed in his mouth, and the spices attached to the surface of the mutton also bloomed in his mouth. The fragrance of the onions and the sesame seeds that exploded during chewing made the taste buds on the tip of his tongue fall into a carnival. What kind of divine taste is this? The taste is too good. One bite after another, Kenneth still felt like he couldn't stop after eating 3 mutton skewers in a row. His imperial chef had completely lost the right to participate in this duel. As the king of the Moon Nation, he had to admit that he had never tasted such delicious food in the long years of his rule. Not even one. He glanced at Barbara, who was immersed in eating the skewers, and suddenly could understand why she was willing to stay in this restaurant. There was no need for other complicated reasons. These mutton skewers were already better than countless reasons. The rest of the people in the Moon Nation were also conquered by the mutton skewers. One bite after another, they felt that the meat skewered with bamboo skewers was convenient and flavorful. That was how roasted meat should be eaten. Seems like the taste of the Moon Nation is similar to that of the Norland continent. Meg looked at the people who were engrossed in eating the skewers, and curled his lips slightly. The sense of accomplishment in his heart increased a little. The Moon Nation's mutton skewers were served first. The other customers who hadn't served their dishes smelled the aroma and saw the mountain of meat skewers decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. All of them couldn't help but swallow their saliva. However, everyone had ordered quite a number of dishes, and was too embarrassed to change now. Hence, they could only watch and wait for their own dishes to be served. Meg's actions were very fast. Not long after the skewers were served, the 10 beggars' chickens from Lantist were ready. Dexter and the Lantistians looked at the beggar's chicken that was roasted like a golden egg. Their expressions became solemn and reverent, and they all bowed to the beggar's chicken. This was the holy item that saved Lantist from the abyss of suffering. Gina held a small wooden hammer in her hand, and solemnly knocked open the mud casing that was wrapped around the chicken. Following a few crisp sounds, the hardened mud casing was knocked open one by one. The golden and crispy beggar's chicken was revealed in front of everyone, and the rich aroma of the roasted chicken spread with the heat. Everyone was very familiar with the golden mud casing. This was the key that allowed the Lantistians to leave the bottom of the sea. However, this was the first time that many Lantistians had seen a roasted chicken wrapped in a mud casing. The rich aroma wafted over from such a close distance, and was hard to resist. "Please enjoy." Gina turned and left with a smile. "Let's dig in," Dexter said. He took out a small knife from somewhere, and with a swing of the knife, the beggar's chicken on the plate was cut into a dozen pieces. He reached out and picked up a drumstick. The crispy chicken skin was bitten open gently, and the tender meat melted in his mouth. The tenderness and freshness that belonged to the chicken bloomed instantly, and the taste buds on the tip of his tongue were disarmed immediately. He didn't have time to chew, and before it could gain a firm foothold on the tip of his tongue, it slid down his throat like a naughty little chick. Tender without any dregs, with a unique flavor. This unexpected delicacy made Dexter, who was usually calm, let out a soft hum uncontrollably. Such an exquisite delicacy actually exists. Mr. Meg's culinary skills are simply divine. He is indeed the man chosen by God. Dexter exclaimed. Words couldn't describe how touched he was. He could only take a few more bites to express his thoughts. The representatives from the Moon Nation and Lantist, who were the last to arrive, were eating the roasted chicken and eating the roasted chicken. The various representatives were so hungry that they couldn't control themselves, and their gazes towards the kitchen became more frequent. This was a gathering that had gathered all of the top powers, but Mag was the chef, so it was a little strange to see him in such a state. No pop-up window. Chapter 1778. The sumptuous and delicious lunch gave the people from the Moon Nation a good first impression of the Norland continent. To be able to entertain them with such delicacies was enough to show their sincerity and effort. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Kenneth didn't waste any more time. He brought Jonas and the two formation masters, and followed Novan and Barbara to the place where the devil was sealed. After a while, Kenneth, Jonas, and the rest stood outside the sealing spell formation. They were shocked speechless as they looked at the terrifying octopus monster that was close to 1,000 meters tall in the spell formation. Such an evil and terrifying aura. I didn't expect devils to really exist in this world. Kenneth had a shocked expression. All his previous doubts were dispelled at this moment. Barbara's description wasn't exaggerated at all. This devil was indeed powerful and terrifying. Even as a 10th-tier powerhouse, they still felt small and powerless in front of it. When they just arrived, this devil even attacked the seal angrily once. That thin spell formation that was on the verge of collapse made everyone a little afraid that it would disperse. This sealing spell formation is indeed passed down from ancient times. It should be from the same period as that teleportation portal. Jonas walked around the sealing spell formation, and looked at the octopus monster in the spell formation with a grave expression. So, this fellow has survived from ancient times until now, and still maintains its terrifying power. The expressions of Kenneth and the rest changed slightly. A terrifying devil that had existed since ancient times. Apart from repairing and strengthening the spell formation, we have no other way to deal with it at the moment, Novan said in a low voice. Your Majesty, I think we should help them repair the spell formation. If this devil breaks the seal, it will bring disaster to countless innocent lives. With its power, we can't guarantee that it won't come to the Moon Nation, Jonas said to Kenneth. Kenneth was silent for a while before he nodded. I allow you to cooperate with them to repair this seal, and reseal this devil. A smile appeared on Novan and Barbara's faces. Master, we've already completed the analysis of most of the runes in the spell formation. Why don't we start from these 60-odd runes? Barbara went forward with a smile. No, we'll start from the beginning. However, Jonas shook his head, and smilingly said to the puzzled Barbara, this array formation is even more complicated than that teleportation portal. We only have 3 days, and we can't afford to make any mistakes. Hence, we have to reanalyze the array formation from the beginning to ensure that every rune is correct. Alright. Some of my runes were indeed half-guessed. Barbara nodded and followed behind them with a small notebook, ready to act as an assistant. Jonas circled the spell formation and observed it for a long time. He looked at Novan, and said, apart from analyzing the spell formation, we also need as many spell formation materials as possible. According to my observation, the original seal formation is already close to collapsing, and we can't directly reinforce and repair it. We can only rebuild a seal formation. All right, I will arrange this matter with the city lord. Novan nodded. It wasn't that he didn't know about this. It was just that he couldn't even analyze the spell formation previously, let alone rebuild a seal formation. Now that Jonas and the other two had joined in, the dilemma had been resolved. We only have one day to analyze this spell formation, so we have to ensure that it's accurate and fast. Let's start now with the princess's analysis as the foundation. Jonas brought the 3 formation masters with him, and immediately immersed themselves in the task of analyzing the spell formation. Novan made a trip back to the restaurant, and informed the various representatives that the Moon Nation was willing to help the Norland continent rebuild the seal formation, but they needed the various clans to provide as many materials as possible. This is a list of materials. The materials used for the ancient seal formation are very precious, and there are many types. It's not something that 1 or 2 clans can provide. Hence, I hope that the various clans can collect these materials as much as possible, and send them to Chaos City before noon tomorrow. Novan looked at the various representatives present. This is a war against time. We don't have much time left. We have to rebuild a seal formation and reseal that devil. That's great. If we can reseal it, we won't have to be on tenterhooks anymore, Elliot said with a smile with an excited expression. That's the most optimistic outcome. Novan glanced at Elliot. However, that devil might have already escaped before we can finish building the spell formation. Hence, I hope that all of you can still prepare the powerhouses in your clans to reinforce Chaos City at any time. This is a matter that concerns all the clans on the Norland continent. No one can be spared. The various representatives nodded in agreement. They knew that what Novan said was true. Lewis stood up with a grave expression, and said, sealing it is only the beginning. We don't know how many of these sealing spell formations have been passed down since ancient times, and whether they can still take on the task of sealing the devil. However, what we can be sure of is that the lower half of this devil should still be sealed somewhere on the Norland continent. The various representatives' expressions turned grave when they heard that. If the devil that was sealed somewhere escapes without us knowing, Connie said softly, then we will have no way to avoid it. We can only fight it, Rex said calmly. The various representatives were silent. However, that seemed to be the only choice. Now, that old man Edward should have a headache, right? Meg looked at Josh, who had a grave expression, and curled his lips. He removed his apron, and prepared to go out for a stroll and fetch Amy back while he was at it. Meg was no longer interested in what the various representatives were talking about in the afternoon. It was nothing more than how to coordinate the combat power of the various clans to deal with the worst possible situation. As for the issue of territory that was hotly contested in the morning, it had already been put aside. Although most of the reason was because of the sudden incident with the devil, some of it was also because of the sudden emergence of Lantist and the Moon Nation. These two factions had quite a number of high-end combat power. If they were to join the fight for territory, there might be an uncontrollable situation. Meg knew Lantist's attitude. They actually didn't have much desire to fight for land with the other clans. As the only amphibious race on the Norland continent, the boundless ocean was their territory. There was an abundance of food there, and the environment was livable. There was no need for them to fight for land. As for the Moon Nation, before they built a new large-scale passageway, they didn't have the ability to import a large amount of military power to join the fight for land with the other clans. The teleportation portal was in his restaurant. Meg even started to consider if he should build a moon landing ticket station in his restaurant in the future. He could sell tickets on both sides. Those who came from the Moon Nation would have to buy tickets, and those who wanted to go to the Moon Nation would also have to buy tickets. That's a good deal. Even Meg couldn't help but be impressed by his own wisdom. Chapter 1779. Meg went out to do 3 things. He went to the factory in the north of the city. The weaving factory was operating normally, and the brewery was in the final stages of construction. Hannah was at the construction site every day to ensure that the brewery would be built according to her ideas. She couldn't wait to see the image of rum gushing out of the new brewing machine. After that, Meg went to the Blue Suede to have afternoon tea with Miss Gloria and talk about life and dreams. Seeing that it was about time, Meg rode his bicycle to fetch Amy home for dinner. Mr. Mag always gives off a laid-back and comfortable vibe. Gloria stood in front of the window on the second floor and watched the figure riding away leisurely with a faint smile and a blush on her face. Young mistress, Chaos City's sales bulletin is back. Do you want to read it now or at night? Mar's voice sounded from behind. Give it to me. Gloria's expression immediately became cold again. She turned to take the bulletin that had just been delivered, and entered her career woman time. She didn't have much time left. During this period, her grandmother had been bringing her aunt and her 2 elder sisters to beg and cry in front of her grandfather every day. She had to make Cyril lose the chance to become the successor completely before her grandfather changed his mind. "Father, did you know that Daphne's grandpa brought us to catch rabbits today? We caught a lot of rabbits. The rabbits are so cute." Amy sat at the back of the bicycle with a small cage in her hand. There was a grayish-white rabbit in it. "So, are you going to keep this rabbit?" Meg asked with a smile. Meow. Ugly Duckling, who had intermittent motion sickness, poked its head out of the basket and looked at Amy concernedly. "Daphne's grandpa said that this rabbit is already an adult. It's no longer a little rabbit," Amy said. So, we don't have to keep it anymore." Amy thought about it seriously for a while and said, "You can roast it, boil it, or fry it. It'll definitely be delicious." Ugly Duckling scratched its head with its paw and pondered for a moment before its eyes suddenly widened in realization. "Wow, you!" Ugly Duckling lay back down in the basket of the cart in a daze. "That's a good idea." Meg nodded his head smilingly. "Roast rabbit, diving rabbit, diced pepper rabbit, spicy rabbit head." TSK thinking that such a cute bunny was about to be eaten, she couldn't help but tear up. Meg brought Amy back to the restaurant. They smoothly passed the security guards and entered the restaurant. The representatives of the various clans, who had been arguing intensely, saw Meg and his daughter walk in. Suddenly, he felt a little hungry. What a magical power! This chef actually controlled the rhythm of this meeting. Little Amy. Crassus looked at Amy and immediately stood up with a smile. Julian also had a smile on his face, but he still maintained the dignity of a great magic caster and wasn't in a hurry to get up. "Master Crassus, Master Julian?" When Amy saw her 2 masters, she also skipped over happily and hugged their thighs respectively. Then, she smiled at the representatives of the various clans, and said, "Let me introduce them to everyone. These 2 are my masters." The corners of the representatives' mouths twitched. The little girl was young, but she really knew how to hug thighs. Now, the entire Norland continent knew that this little girl couldn't be offended. Meg went back to the kitchen consciously, and began to prepare dinner for the various clans' representatives. Meanwhile, the various clans' representatives, who were still discussing how to solve the problem of the devils, actually flipped through the menu and started to think about what to eat for dinner. "Mr. Mac is going to harm the country and the people." Michael laughed in his heart. He glanced at the menu and seriously considered whether he should eat grilled fish or braised chicken and rice for dinner. The various clans' congress ended at 9 p.m. "This restaurant is great. I've eaten so much that I've forgotten what I'm here for today. Are we still having the meeting here tomorrow?" The various clans' representatives rubbed their bloated stomachs, and walked out of the restaurant longingly. Such a day is so fulfilling. Vanessa followed Josh into the horse-drawn carriage, and lamented. She had hot pot for dinner again, and was really satisfied. "Vanessa, you will return to Rodu with President Richard tomorrow morning," Josh said to Vanessa seriously. "Hot?" Vanessa was slightly taken aback, and immediately shook her head. "No, I finally returned to Chaos City. How can I go on a one-day trip? This is not a joke. That devil is not far from Chaos City, and we still can't be sure if those spell formation masters from the Moon Nation have the ability to reseal it. Chaos City is the most dangerous place now, so you have to return to Rodu. I will get Uncle Abraham to go back with you tomorrow," Josh said seriously, and his voice also became more serious. This was the first time Vanessa had seen Josh speak to her like this. She immediately became weaker, and hesitantly said, "But, won't the various clans send out their powerhouses? Won't they be able to kill that devil? Its power is beyond your imagination." Josh shook his head. His face suddenly paled, and he instinctively reached out to press on the carriage. "What's wrong, big brother Josh?" Vanessa looked at Josh nervously. "I'm fine. It's just a small injury." Josh shook his head. He looked at Vanessa, and said, "But you have to go back tomorrow. Otherwise, if anything happens to you, I won't be able to answer to Father." Vanessa hesitated for a moment, but still nodded, and softly said, "All right, then I will go home. Good girl." Josh patted her head with a smile. "When this is over, I will bring you to Amy's to eat to your heart's content." Vanessa's eyes lit up. She looked into Josh's eyes, and said, "You can't lie to me. I'm a dog if I lie to you." Josh nodded with a smile, and looked at Vanessa with a doting gaze. The carriage stopped outside the city lord's manor, and Josh calmly alighted before returning to his room. As soon as he entered the room, the anti-prying spell formation that he had brought with him was activated. Josh couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of black blood. His already pale face turned even paler. He staggered forward a couple of steps, and sat down on the table with great difficulty. Then, he panted heavily. He took out a small bottle from his bosom, pulled out the stopper, and poured out a handful of small blue pills. Then, he put the pills into his mouth with trembling hands. He grabbed the water bottle on the table and directly poured a few mouthfuls of water into his mouth before he could barely swallow the pills. After doing all that, Josh slumped onto the table, panting heavily. It took him a long time to catch his breath. Josh slumped on the table for a long time. The pills gradually took effect, and a hint of color finally returned to his face. He slowly stood up, and pulled out a black box from under his bed. He opened the lid, and looked at the black sculpture inside. "You almost killed me. No pop-up window." Chapter 1780. Mother, does this feel good? Amy stood on the bed and gave Irina, who was sitting beside the bed, a pat on her back. Ugly Duckling lay by her feet and massaged her calves attentively as well. It feels good." Irina closed her eyes, but she couldn't hide the smile on her face. Tisk, tisk. Meg stood at the side, feeling a little jealous. His daughter hadn't massaged his back that many times. "I walked a little too much today, and my legs are a little sore." Irina lifted her slender leg and placed it gently on the stool beside the bed as she looked up at Meg. Amy also immediately looked at Meg and gave him a look. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. "He was a 7-foot-tall man, how could he? Then I'll give you a massage." Meg sat down on the stool naturally and placed Irina's foot on his lap. Her calves were slender and fair, but they weren't skinny. They had beautiful curves, and her ankles were small and delicate. Her round toes were like plump pearls. When Meg touched them, the backs of her feet trembled a little nervously. Although Meg wasn't a foot fetish, he was still in awe of this pair of feet that were as exquisite as a work of art. Of course, when he held this foot in his hand, the pride that belonged to a man rushed to his head. "Yes, let me introduce you. This is my wife's foot. Are you going to massage it or not?" Irina looked at Meg, who was in a daze as he held her foot, and a blush appeared on her face as she asked shyly. "I'm trying to see where to start." "Start." Meg coughed awkwardly. He placed his hand on Irina's foot and began to give her a proper massage. Her skin was very smooth and delicate, and her muscles were very elastic. She was a high-quality ingredient. Meg tried his best to put away his distracting thoughts as he recalled the pressing techniques and acupoints of those cute girls when he was cultivating his body and mind. Then, he began to massage Irina's calves and feet. Looking at Irina sitting there, as well as Amy, who was behind her, massaging her back and occasionally saying a few witty words, Meg felt a warm feeling in his heart. This kind of happiness did not come easily, and he hoped that it would last forever. Irina's face was slightly red. However, other than the initial nervousness, as Meg became more proficient in massaging, the comfortable feeling from the soles of her feet and calves gradually made her relax. What surprised her was Meg's massage technique. He was obviously a man who only knew how to use a big sword and a kitchen knife. When did he learn this massage technique? It made her feel more comfortable than soaking in a hot spring. In Rodu, the imperial palace was still brightly lit. The letter that had been sent back from Chaos City had shaken Rodu to its core. His Majesty had gathered all the court officials for a meeting, and it had not ended even after nightfall. There were still over a dozen court officials sitting in the meeting hall. "Your Majesty, according to your request, we have already prepared 18 types of spell formation materials. Should we send them to Chaos City tonight?" An official said respectfully as he strode into the meeting hall. Andre, who was sitting on the throne, calmly said, "There's no hurry. We will set off tomorrow morning." "Yes." That official accepted the order, and turned to leave quickly. "Your Majesty, this incident with the devils happened too suddenly, and the sudden appearance of the Moon Nation and Lantis made a huge change. I wonder how we should express our stance during the peace conference?" An official asked worriedly. All the other officials also looked worried. Originally, with the Roth Empire's national power, everyone thought that they should propose to redivide the territories during the peace conference. The best situation would be to subdue the enemy without a fight, and make the various races give up a part of their territory to the Roth Empire voluntarily. However, the appearance of the devils made the peace conference seem less important. Meanwhile, the appearance of Lantis and the Moon Nation, which had many 10th-tier powerhouses, became a huge change in the division of the territories. "Let's put the peace conference aside for now. Let's settle that fellow that suddenly appeared first." Andre stood up. "Let them prepare. If the seal's reconstruction fails, we will send 20 10th tier Great Magic Casters and 20 10th tier Knights to reinforce Chaos City. 40 10th tier powerhouses. All the officials in the hall were shocked. This was almost 90% of Chaos City's highest combat power, and His Majesty actually sent all of them out. It's time to let them know how powerful the Roth Empire is. Andre smiled, and left under the escort of a group of guards. Your Majesty is wise. All the officials were deep in thought. Andre walked out of the hall, and suddenly said to a close official beside him, "Get all the military regions to prepare for level 1 battle." "Yes," that close official answered softly before leaving quickly. "Demon. You've come at the right time. I'd like to see how powerful you are." Andre sneered. "Devil." In the starry cave, Helena looked at the flickering stars in the crystal ball with a grave expression. A dark cloud was spreading among the stars like a black hole, as if it was going to swallow all the stars. High Priestess, Princess Sally is too rash. Not only did she not align herself with the Roth Empire, she even made such a promise to the elves. "Do we need to negotiate with Chaos City about sending powerhouses?" An elf elder said. "Fool. Do you think the Roth Empire is really kind to us?" Helena glanced at that elf coldly, and sarcastically said, "If the Roth Empire really conquers the Norland continent, Andre, this old fool, would never let us elves survive alone." But that elf still wanted to say something. The elves are no longer the elves of the past. We can't even guarantee that we can defeat the goblins now. What do we have to negotiate with the Roth Empire? That fragile and pitiful relationship? Helena sneered. Sally made the right choice at the right time. This time, we have to stand against the Roth Empire in order to have a chance of surviving this storm. Helena retracted her gaze, and looked up at the starry sky with a grave expression. A huge crisis has already loomed over the Wind Forest. The news of the terrifying devil's existence spread quickly and widely through the letters sent by the various representatives to their clans. That night, the group of people who stood on the ruling class of the Norland continent couldn't sleep. Countless resources were taken out from the dusty treasure vaults, and placed on the flying steeds to reinforce Chaos City. The best spell formation masters of each race were all mobilized, and would be sent along with the spell formation materials. This was a war that concerned the survival of all the races on the Norland continent. This time, everyone shared a common destiny. Chapter 1781. Meg, on the other hand, had a good night's sleep. Wife, children, and a warm bed. Such a simple and beautiful vision was realized by Meg just like that. Although he was sleeping on the floor, it didn't affect the deep sense of satisfaction in his heart when he looked at the two lovely people sleeping peacefully on the bed. After getting out of bed quietly and washing up, Meg went downstairs to write a notice and paste it on the door, researching a new dish. Business will be suspended for 3 days from today onwards. The arrival of the people from the Moon Nation was a stabilizing factor in the originally tense situation. However, this didn't mean that the matter of resealing the devil was in the bag. They didn't have much time left. If there was any mistake, they would have to face a terrifying devil. Although the various races' reinforcements were already on the way, if the first batch of powerhouses couldn't resist that devil, Chaos City, which was only 15 kilometers away from the Thunderstorm Mountains, would be the first to bear the brunt. If they were to tell the residents of Chaos City the truth now, it would definitely cause widespread panic. Where could they run to? The City of Chaos was in the center of the entire continent, which meant that the devil was also in the center of the continent. He could choose to kill in any direction. In Chaos City, most of the residents were just ordinary people after all. They didn't have mounts that could travel 500 kilometers in a day, and they didn't have passes that allowed them to enter the various races' territories easily. This was the reason why the City Lord's castle had sealed off the news. If even the most powerful powerhouses on the Norland continent couldn't stop the devil, then it would be meaningless to abandon the city and flee. Mag felt that there was nothing wrong with what Chaos City had done. He was sure that even if Chaos City really faced the devil, the people from the City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple would die outside the city before the residents. And he also needed more time to participate in this war, so he couldn't split his attention to continue cooking and running the restaurant. Meg had already informed Mia and the rest about the suspension of business last night. They all understood how tense the current situation was. Irina drank her soy milk as she looked up at Meg, who came out with a plate of steak, and asked, "Just the 3 of us for breakfast?" "Yes, I asked Gina to go home and play for a few days during the holidays." Meg nodded and cut the steak for Amy with a knife and fork. Closing the restaurant for 3 days is not a small loss. Irina looked at Meg with a smile. She knew how much Meg cared about the business of the restaurant. It doesn't matter. Whatever we lose, we can get it back from that guy sooner or later. Meg was quite calm. As long as the people of the Moon Nation could rebuild the seal, the system could build an octopus tentacle processing plant. When that time came, he would start to promote the octopus tentacles vigorously. He had to earn back the losses of the past 3 days. Irina smiled and didn't say anything. Of course, a man who could make money was good. Father, all of you are going to save the world, so what should Amy do? Amy chewed on her steak and looked at Meg with a troubled expression. Amy just needs to be cute, Meg said with a smile. Oh. Amy nodded as if she didn't fully understand. Then, Amy, where do you want to go to play today? Amy thought for a while and said, I want to go to Big Sister Mia's ice cream shop to play today. All the big sisters are there today, so I'll go there and play for the day. Okay, I'll send you there later. Meg nodded. He was relieved to let Amy and Mia stay there. Do you want them to leave first? Irina suddenly asked. Meg naturally knew what she meant. After a moment of silence, he looked into her eyes and said, I don't think it's necessary now. If the worst happens, I'll get Azzy to bring them away, Meg continued. Irina nodded slightly and didn't ask further. After breakfast, Meg sent Amy to the ice cream shop. When the bicycle turned into the alley, he had already changed his equipment. Meg went to the Thunderstorm Mountains and went underground. However, he didn't enter the cave, and only chatted with Novan outside. The good news was that Jonas and the rest showed great professionalism. They managed to decipher almost all the runes in one night, and they were now in the inspection stage. They would be able to finish the work by noon. However, the troublesome thing was that this seal spell formation was more complicated than they had originally estimated. To completely replicate it in 2 days, both the time and materials were not optimistic. Good luck. Meg turned and left. He didn't know anything about spell formations, and he didn't have a single material that could be used, so he didn't want to get involved in these matters. However, from Novan's words, he could roughly understand some of the meaning. Even if they had sufficient materials, it would be very difficult for them to rebuild a new seal spell formation before the seal lost its effect. This meant that they had to buy more time for the spell formation masters to stop that devil from leaving the seal's range. He, who was at the 9th tier, was almost killed by that octopus monster back then. However, he had already obtained the strength point now, so he planned to find a place to get electrocuted properly to restore his strength to its peak state. After finding a place with good feng shui for himself, Meg, who was preparing to welcome the lightning tribulation, suddenly asked, Oh, right. System, can this lightning tribulation cause strong damage to that octopus monster? According to experiments, when the intensity of the lightning reaches a certain level, it will cause a paralyzing effect on the living thing. The exact degree depends on the intensity of the lightning. The lightning tribulation is born from heaven and earth, and is a part of the rules of this world. After the host loses the strength point, there will be a strong effect of attracting lightning, thus triggering the lightning tribulation. At this time, everything within a 10-meter radius of the host's body will be treated as one with the host. The intensity of the lightning tribulation will be determined according to the strength of the target. It will be stronger if the target is stronger. The system's voice sounded. Wonderful. Meg's eyes lit up, and he immediately gave up on the idea of striking himself. Even if he recovered to the 10th tier, he would probably only be able to chop off a few of the octopus monster's tentacles with his sword. It wouldn't change anything. However, if he were to go through the tribulation with the octopus monster, just imagining that scene was exciting enough. Bro, let's go through the tribulation together if there's a chance. Sigh. This is such a sad day. At the entrance of Amy's, Vanessa and Abraham sighed at the same time as they looked at the notice hanging on the door. All right. Since it's not open, we should get going, Abraham said as he retracted his gaze. Luckily, I had 2 hot pot meals yesterday. I don't have any regrets now, Vanessa consoled herself as she followed Abraham into the horse-drawn carriage. I don't think there's a need for me to go back to Rodu at all. Chaos City is still in order. Nobody thinks anything of it, Abraham said to Josh, who was sitting opposite him. Vanessa stole a glance at Josh, and didn't say anything. Uncle Abraham, this is Royal Father's decree. You've been out for some time, so it's time for you to go back and take a look. Josh took out a letter from his pocket, and passed it to Abraham. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.